Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're taking a slow, grimy stroll back to 1700s Boston, before the powdered wigs, before the Tea Party, before the idea of a United States even entered anyone's candlelit brain. And let me be real with you, you probably won't survive this. Not because you'll be run through by a redcoat's bayonet or accused of witchcraft by your neighbour with the wandering eye. Though sure, both of those are on the table. No, it's the dysentery, poor dental hygiene, and the constant risk of fire that'll probably get you. But hey, that's just part of the charm, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You land in Boston around 1700, and the first thing you notice is it smells. A confusing blend of horse manure, sea brine, rotting wood, and about 6 different kinds of human waste. It's not your fault. Boston's not really a city yet. It's a work in progress, and it shows. There's no formal city planning committee, no proper sewage system, and certainly no curbside pickup. This is a place where buildings just sort of happen. A house here, a smithy there, a tavern that started as someone's front room. The roads, if you can call them that, are more like packed earth paths that turn to slippery sludge every time it rains, which it just did, which it always does. The people walking these muddy paths are mostly English colonists, and their dialects are thick, their clothes thicker. It's a cold place, literally and culturally. You're not getting a warm welcome, but then again no one else is either. Boston is young and its people are suspicious of outsiders, of Catholics, of women who talk too loud and definite depths of fun. You pass houses that look half-finished but still occupied. Timber frames with wide gaps chinked by whatever could be stuffed inside. Moss, horsehair, old fabric. Windows are small and expensive, so some homes have just a few, or none at all. Chimneys smoke lazily in the damp air, and that smoke gets trapped in narrow alleyways between buildings that lean awkwardly against each other, like tipsy uncles at a funeral. If you listen closely, you can hear the hammer of a blacksmith, the sharp clang echoing like a heartbeat through the fog. You're walking uphill, because of course you are. Boston back then sits on a narrow hilly peninsula. The geography isn't subtle. It rises sharply and falls just as fast, which means everything drains downhill, including things you'd rather not step in. They haven't filled in the marshes or flattened the hills yet. Boston is still 3 hills, hence its old nickname. Tremountain, you'll eventually see that gets shortened to Tremont. That's right, that fancy street name in modern Boston. Just a leftover syllable from the town's original topography. As you wander, you notice something odd. Silence in patches. Not a peaceful silence, but more like the pause in a conversation when something's gone wrong. There are parts of the town where no one speaks above a whisper. Maybe someone died there, or maybe something worse happened. The memory of Salem isn't far away, only a few years past and just a day's ride. People are still twitchy about magic, omens, dreams, and strange women. And Boston? It's full of strange women, mostly widows. The 1600s were not kind to husbands. You reach the Common, a large open patch of land. It's used for everything: grazing cows, military drills, public punishment, maybe even the occasional picnic if you're feeling optimistic. Stocks and whipping posts stand ominously nearby. You watch a few kids dare each other to touch the pillory, giggling before running off. Adults walk by without even glancing. Punishment is public, constant and casual. Quirky detail for the night. The people here genuinely believe in miasmas, bad air that causes disease, which is funny because they're basically stewing in it. But to them, if the air smells rotten, it must be unhealthy. Which, okay, it kind of is. So they burn herbs, light pine torches, and hang bundles of flowers near their doors, thinking it might keep illness out. It won't, but it does make the place slightly more tolerable. As for the historical footnote that really grounds this year, Boston's population is just under 7,000 people. That's it. A town, not a city, but already it's the biggest colonial settlement in New England. It's got a major port, a few churches, a school, and 1 or 2 ambitious men who can already taste the idea of self-rule. But none of that is on paper yet. Right now it's mostly goats, gossip, and God. And here's the thing scholars still bicker about. Just how Puritan was Boston in 1700? Some argue the fire was dying out, that the ironclad morals of the 1600s were fading into a more secular, trade-focused society. Others say the influence of religion was still absolute, just quieter, woven deeper into law and custom. There are diaries from the era that show both, businessmen swearing by the Lord in public and sneaking into taverns by candlelight. You're going to get a front row seat to that tension, trust me. So here you are, standing at the edge of a town that isn't sure what it wants to be, a place both rigid and chaotic, and as the mist thickens and the church bell chimes the hour, too slowly, always too slowly, you realise something. You're going to need boots, big ones, maybe a torch, and a good dose of luck, because surviving Boston in the 1700s, it's going to take more than just grit. It's going to take charm, cunning, and probably a tolerance for very weak beer. The morning doesn't so much begin as it does insist. There's no soft sunrise streaming gently through gauzy curtains. There are no gauzy curtains for one. There's just the sharp clang of a church bell echoing across the rooftops, bounced off the harbour's fog and slammed straight into your half-sleeping skull. It's somewhere between 5 and 6 a.m, and already the air is thick with smoke from cook fires and the sour tang of yesterday's chamber pots. Welcome to the start of your day in 1700s Boston. There are no alarms, no snooze buttons, no option to sleep in. If you're not up, you're falling behind, and nobody in this town has time for that. Your neighbours are already stomping around above and beside you, depending on whether you live in a cramped tenement or a family's upper floor. The wood creaks in protest with every step. You hear voices, some arguing, some praying, some just hacking up phlegm to get the day going. And just to keep things classy, a rooster lets out its obligatory caw like it has a grudge. You sit up from your straw mattress, brushing off bits of hay and whatever else decided to join you during the night. The air in your room is icy enough to make your breath visible, even though it's spring. Boston doesn't care about your comfort. There's no central heating, just the dying embers of a hearth fire that wasn't worth keeping alive through the night. You shiver your way into the consciousness and reach for your clothes, yesterday's clothes, because, yeah, that's just what people do. Unless you're one of the rare rich Bostonians with a change of linens, you're going to wear the same thing until it can stand up by itself. The first thing you do, after not brushing your teeth because toothbrushes are expensive and soap tastes better than your only toothpaste option, burnt eggshells mixed with soot, is head toward the fire. Or rather, to the tiny cooking area that pretends to be a kitchen. You need to relight it. You strike flint to steel, catching a spark onto a shred of linen charcloth, and after some frustrating fumbling, a curl of smoke rises. The fire begins to warm your fingers as you lean over, eyes watering, lungs collecting a healthy serving of soot. Breakfast in Boston isn't exactly thrilling. There's no stack of pancakes, no frothy latte, and definitely no avocado toast. You're lucky if you get something hot. Most people start the day with what's left over from the night before, a crust of bread maybe dipped in some weak broth, or porridge that's mostly water and barely oats. If you're working class, and you probably are, you might eat hasty pudding, which sounds charming, but is actually just cornmeal boiled in water until it becomes a greyish mush. It's filling, not fun. For drink, it's not water, never water. The town's wells are shallow, and waste disposal is, let's say, non-existent. So you reach for the safer option, beer, but don't get excited. It's not the kind of beer that ends in bar fights and karaoke. Morning beer or small beer is weak, barely alcoholic, and brewed specifically to hydrate without killing you. You hand a cup to your kid. They drink it too. It's normal. Don't think about it too hard. The streets outside are already alive, and you can hear it. Horses clop unevenly over half-frozen mud. Wagons creak under barrels of salted fish and pine wood. A woman calls out in a voice that's been through too many cold mornings, yelling about fresh milk. You'll never know if it's true. Another voice calls for help with a broken cart. No one responds. That's just the rhythm of Boston mornings. Early, urgent, and slightly indifferent. Now, let's talk about time. You don't have a clock. No one you know has a clock. There might be one on the meeting house if you live near the centre of town, but even that's more symbolic than accurate. So how do people know when it's time to get up, open their shop, or scold their apprentice? Bells, church bells, ship bells, hand bells. Different tones mean different things, and your ears have learned to sort them out. A long, slow toll might mean a sermon is starting. A quick triple clang could signal danger. And if there's no bell at all, you just guess based on the sun and how guilty you feel for still being indoors. By now, someone in your household is already complaining about the laundry. It's a full-day affair, done with lye soap and cold water in a wooden tub that warps every time it rains. You won't be doing laundry every day, it takes too much work. Maybe once a week. But the smell of it, the wet wool, the harsh soap, the soaked undergarments flapping in the wind, is just part of the morning atmosphere. Here's a weird little truth you learn quickly. People don't wake up slow in 1700s Boston. You can't. The second you're out of bed, you're working, fetching water, tending fires, sweeping out yesterday's ashes, feeding animals if you have them, avoiding them if you don't. The work is relentless. Children work, grandparents work, even visitors feel pressured to do something, anything, or risk being seen as lazy. And laziness here is practically a sin. Historically, this is the time Boston begins transforming from a strictly Puritan outpost into a bustling port with rising social classes and real economic layers. There's a push and pull happening under the surface. Some people still cling to the values of early colonists: God, modesty, community punishment, while others chase trade, money, and very quietly freedom. You can feel that tension even in the morning routines. Some homes still begin the day with long family prayer. Others have dropped it entirely and now mumble blessings only when someone's bleeding. And here's the scholarly argument for this section. How widespread was literacy in these homes? Some say Boston had the highest literacy rate in colonial America, thanks to its religious obsession with reading the Bible. Others argue that literacy, especially for women and labourers, was more idealised than actual. Letters from the era are riddled with misspellings, inconsistent grammar, and phonetic scrawlings that suggest many were taught to read but not to write. So, are you literate? Maybe, but if you are, you're using it to read sermons and sign contracts, definitely not for journaling about your feelings. As the sun climbs, still hidden behind thick clouds, you grab your tools, or your basket, or your child's hand, and prepare to step out into a world that doesn't wait for anyone. There's no lounging, there's no scrolling through messages or catching up on news, unless someone reads it to you out loud, and even then it's probably yesterday's paper. In Boston, your day starts early and doesn't slow down. Not for the cold, not for exhaustion, not even for breakfast beer. You take a moment, just a small one, standing in the doorway of your home, or what passes for one, to catch your breath. But even now, in this half second of quiet, you feel it pressing in on you. The unspoken social code of 1700s Boston. It's not written down anywhere, but it's stitched into every glance, every chore, every handshake too long or too short. And whether you like it or not, who you are in this world, your rank, your worth, your future, isn't something you get to choose. It's already been decided, before you even got here. Let's say you're a man, good for you. You've already won a significant portion of the colonial lottery, but even that comes with an asterisk. Are you a landowner? Are you white? Are you Protestant? If the answer to any of these is no, your options start shrinking like last week's wash in boiling water. Race, class, and religion decide almost everything in this society. You can feel it in the way people talk to you or don't. In the work you're allowed to do, the clothing you're expected to wear, the food you're permitted to eat in public without raising eyebrows. If you're white and male and own property, congratulations. You're probably in the top 10% of the Boston hierarchy. You're allowed to vote in town meetings, run a shop, serve in the militia, and make decisions that affect people way below your station. And believe me, there are many people below your station. Servants, indentured labourers, enslaved people, widows, native people shoved to the edges of your maps and your mind. This place might be a town of 7,000, but it runs like a caste system with English lace on top. Now let's flip the script. Say you're a woman. Suddenly the rules get tighter. If you're married, your legal identity vanishes into your husband's. That's not poetic, it's literal. You can't sign contracts, own property, or even testify in most courts without permission. You might manage your household, sure, and maybe even the family business if your husband's at sea or dead, which is honestly pretty likely. But legally, you're a shadow, an extension of someone else's name. But not all women are treated the same, and here's where it gets messy. If you're a white woman from a merchant family, you might be educated, you might have servants, and you might even run a social circle so tight it chokes. But if you're poor, you're scrubbing your neighbour's laundry or peddling root vegetables from a basket your child carries while begging for coins. And if you're a woman of colour, particularly an indigenous woman or someone of African descent, whether free or enslaved, your experience is so far outside the Puritan ideal that people will either ignore you entirely or inspect you like livestock, sometimes both in the same breath. Children don't escape this hierarchy either. They are born into it like clay poured into moulds. Sons of the elite get tutors and future colleges, daughters of farmers learn spinning and survival. Black children born into slavery, they start work around age 5. No school, no future to imagine, just years of labour on behalf of someone else. In Boston, you grow up fast and your life is shaped by roles you didn't choose. It's not just the people around you, it's the very way the town is structured. Take a walk through Boston's winding streets and you'll start to notice patterns. The better homes are closer to the centre, near the meeting house and the harbour. They're larger, sturdier, with more windows, which cost extra, by the way. Glass is expensive. The poor live on the edges, along the marshes, or in crowded lanes where chickens outnumber children. The richer you are, the higher up the hill your home tends to be, literally. It's a built-in metaphor, and nobody misses in it. And here's a quirky detail for you. There's a trend among some of Boston's upper crusts to name their children after virtues. You meet little girls named Patience, Temperance, and even Chastity. That last one comes with a lot of future baggage. Boys, on the other hand, get names like Increase, Deliverance, and Thankful. That's a real one. Thankful Smith. You better hope he lives up to it. Of course, the really elite folks, the ones with inherited English money and long Puritan bloodlines, look down on everyone. They don't hawk wares in the market or hammer nails for a living. They own ships, they own land, they own people, and they don't want their daughters marrying anyone without 3 names and a family crest. These are the Bostonians who will someday wear powdered wigs and argue about Enlightenment ideals, but for now, they're mostly just smug in their mahogany parlour rooms, sipping imported Madeira and judging your muddy boots. The scholars' debate tonight? How much mobility was actually possible in colonial Boston? On paper, the New World promised opportunity. But in practice, social mobility was limited and often depended on catastrophe. Did your employer die and leave you his business? Lucky you! Did you marry up, survive childbirth and inherit land? Rare but possible. But for most, especially women and people of colour, the ladder didn't even have rungs. Some historians argue that indentured servants could earn their freedom and climb into the middle class. Others say that those stories are exceptions, cherry-picked to uphold a fantasy of equal opportunity. Reality, as always, is a lot grimmer and more complicated. But hey, not everything's bleak. There's still a sense of community here. It's rigid and hierarchical, sure, but also intimate. People know your name, they know your family, they know who skipped church last week and who's rumoured to have a flask under their apron. Everyone watches everyone. It's suffocating if you're the one being watched. But it can also mean support in hard times. Someone brings bread when your child is sick, someone else takes your laundry in during a storm. The community can be brutal, but also oddly tender. Still, there's no mistaking it. In this town, you're never just you. You're always someone's something. Someone's wife, someone's son, someone's servant, someone's property. Boston in the 1700s doesn't ask who you are. It decides it for you. So as you step off your stoop and into the churn of daily life, the labels stick. Your clothes mark your class, your skin colour marks your status, your accent marks your origin. It's not fair. But it is Boston. Let's talk about breakfast because, well, you've been up since before the sun with smoke in your lungs and church bells in your ears, and if you're not fueled, you're failing. But forget everything you know about what breakfast should be. There are no eggs Benedict, no cinnamon rolls, no frothy cappuccinos with a little heart in the foam. There's just survival, and survival tastes a lot like yesterday. Warmed over a smoky hearth in a heavy black kettle, you sit at a rough wooden table, one leg always slightly shorter than the others, so your bowl slides if you're not paying attention. What's inside depends. If your family is doing all right, and by that I mean not actively starving, you might be eating a thick porridge made of cornmeal, milk, if the cow's producing, and maybe a chunk of dried apple thrown in for something that passes as flavour. If you're scraping by, it's hasty pudding again. Cornmeal and water, no milk, no fruit, no joy. Most people in Boston eat cornmeal in some form multiple times a day. It's cheap, it stores well, and it was basically gifted to the colonists by indigenous people generations ago, though good luck finding a colonial who'll say that out loud. Wheat is more expensive and often reserved for Sundays or guests you want to impress. A dense brown bread made with rye and Indian corn, sometimes called rye and Injun, makes an appearance when supplies are stable. It's chewy, it's sour, it tastes like effort. Now, if you're lucky, you might have salt pork. It's been sitting in a barrel of brine in the cellar for weeks, months even, and yes, it smells like it. But once it's boiled and tossed into your morning stew or fried in a bit of lard, it delivers enough fat to keep your belly full until dinner. A single slice can be the highlight of the day. There's a saying here, meat is meat and salt is sweet. If you live in Boston, you believe it. And what's that you're washing it all down with? Definitely not clean water. Remember, most wells in Boston are shallow, and waste disposal is more of a let's hope it rains soon situation. So your choices are small beer or cider. Small beer is barely fermented and usually brewed at home. Children drink it, pregnant women drink it, everyone drinks it. There's almost no alcohol, just enough to kill off whatever microbes are floating in the barrel. Cider is a step up, but it costs more. It's tart, cloudy, and possibly the best thing to touch your lips all day. Breakfast isn't quiet. It's clattering pewter spoons, murmured prayers, someone coughing so hard they have to leave the room, and a baby screaming in the corner like it already knows what kind of life it's been born into. Your father, or the head of the household, whoever that may be, might read a passage from the Bible in between bites. You listen with one ear. You're mostly focused on getting your share before the pot runs empty. Now, depending on your station in life, your breakfast might look a little fancier. Wealthy Bostonians have access to imports. Tea from the East Indies, sugar from the West Indies, coffee if they're particularly stylish, and molasses. Oh, molasses is king, is the foundation of 100 colonial recipes, from brown bread to ginger cakes. The irony, of course, is that it's cheap because it's part of the triangle trade, tied directly to slavery in the Caribbean. The sugar you're sprinkling on your oats is soaked in blood. No one talks about that at breakfast, though. Quirky fact time, some colonial Bostonians believed that fruit, especially in the morning, was dangerous. Too cooling for the body, they said, might give you colic, so if you've got an apple, best bake it into a pie and eat it for supper. Breakfast is not the time for such nonsense. After the meal, if you're lucky enough to have a servant or child of appropriate age and social station, someone clears the dishes, wipes down the table with a damp cloth and tosses the scraps outside, either to the pigs, the chickens, or just straight into the street. There are no garbage pickups, no compost bins. Your alley is your trash can, and everyone's fine with that. Sort of. Now, there's one thing that will surprise you. Despite all the smoke, grease, and general grime, the concept of table manners absolutely exists, and people care. You don't eat with your elbows on the table, you don't talk with your mouth full, you don't reach across someone's plate, and heaven help you if you slurp your cider. It's not a free-for-all, it's structured chaos, especially if there's a guest present. Then it becomes a full-on performance. Polite greetings, head bows, careful blessings. The breakfast table becomes a theatre of respectability, but manners only go so far when you're sitting next to someone with 4 teeth and a cough that sounds like it belongs in a horror film. Hygiene is limited. Most people don't wash their hands before eating. Napkins are a luxury. Sometimes sleeves do the job, and there's always that one person, uncle, neighbour, apprentice, who insists on picking his teeth with a knife. It's fine. You look away. Scholars still debate whether breakfast was considered a real meal by the elite. Some 18th century thinkers considered it unnecessary, a gluttonous indulgence that distracted from spiritual discipline. Others saw it as essential fuel for physical labour. The truth is, it varied wildly. Some homes broke their fast with simple bread and moved on. Others went full tavern style with stews and meats, especially if multiple generations were under one roof and everyone needed calories. But one thing is certain, nobody skipped it. Not unless they were sick, punished, or desperately poor. As breakfast ends, people begin scattering. Men grab hats, tools or ledgers and head for the docks, shops, or the town meeting house. Women start the long list of daily domestic labour. Spinning, brewing, scrubbing, mending. Children are either off to school or sent to help with chores. The fire is stoked one last time. Leftovers are packed away if there are any. And the kettle is refilled in case someone comes calling later. The house doesn't quiet down, it just shifts gear. And you? You rise from your stool, stomach full but not satisfied, your hands already stained with ash and your sleeves smelling like salt pork and wood smoke. The day is only beginning, your chores are waiting, and so is the rest of Boston, with its rutted streets, sideways glances, and hundreds of others just like you, surviving one porridge-filled morning at a time. The door sticks when you open it. The wood is warped from the damp swollen just enough to make every entrance and exit feel like a mild struggle. You give it a shove with your hip, and it groans open, letting in a blast of outside air that's part salt, part smoke, and part something died nearby. The first few steps into the street are like stepping into another world, a very cold, very loud, very uneven world. Where you live in Boston tells everyone exactly who you are. Your home is probably a narrow timber frame structure, 2 or 3 stories tall with steep gables and weathered wood siding that never stood a chance against the New England climate. Most houses here aren't built for comfort. They're built because someone had lumber, nails, and a vague idea of what a home should look like. If you're lucky, yours has a chimney that doesn't belch smoke into your upstairs sleeping area, and a roof that leaks only in 2 or 3 places instead of everywhere. Inside, things are snug. If you've got money, your home might have multiple rooms and actual doors. If not, you share one large space with your entire family, and possibly a cousin, an apprentice, or that neighbour whose house burned down last winter. Privacy is a concept reserved for the dead and the very rich. You can hear every conversation, every cough, every fumble in the night, and if someone in your house snores, well, that's just the soundtrack of your life. Walls are made of wood, lath, and a sort of plaster that flakes off in the humidity. Paint, if it exists, is reserved for the outside. Inside, everything is wood on damp wool. Floors creak no matter how light you step, and rugs are rare. Expensive and hard to keep clean when your boots are caked in whatever the street had for breakfast. Now, the sleeping situation. Forget your queen-size mattress and memory foam. You sleep on a straw-stuffed tick mattress. Maybe on a rope bed if you're lucky. If not, it's the floor. Or a shared space with 2 or 3 others stacked like salted fish. In the dead of winter, this is actually a good thing. Bodies equal warmth. But come summer, you are now sleeping in a damp, itchy, snoring human oven. Congratulations. And did I mention vermin? You've got mice in the walls, spiders in the rafters, and if you're in one of the older parts of town, the occasional rat bold enough to scurry right across your floor in broad daylight. Nobody screams. You just throw something at it and keep going. Maybe it'll get the hint. Maybe not. For most families, the kitchen is a corner. One hearth, one heavy iron pot, a few hooks, and shelves for storing whatever dried, salted, or smoked food you manage to preserve. There's no pantry, no fridge, no counter. You eat what you've got, and if you don't have anything, you beg, borrow, or go fishing. Let's move outside for a second. The house probably butts right up against the street. There's no front yard. If you're fortunate enough to have a patch of land behind your home, you might keep chickens, a goat, or a sad-looking garden struggling against Boston's rocky soil. But more likely your yard is just a dumping spot for ashes, scraps, and the chamber pot's contents. And yes, you just throw that out the back, or sometimes out the front. That's why people yell "Gardeloo" before tossing waste out the window. It's French for watch out below, and it is your only warning before a slop avalanche comes raining down. This is what everyone means when they talk about Boston being crowded in the 700s. Houses are built on top of each other, separated by narrow alleys where the wind gets trapped and howls like a banshee all winter. Streets are more footpath than road, twisted and tangled from generations of building with no urban plan. You could get lost trying to find a bakery you swear is just around the corner. And here's your quirky bit of trivia. Outhouses, rare in the city, people use chamber pots, slop buckets, or whatever container is handy, and then dump the contents somewhere not inside. If you're wealthy, you might have a privy built behind your house, essentially a glorified hole with a wooden seat. If you're not, well, you better hope the wind isn't blowing the wrong way when your neighbour empties theirs. But not all homes are misery. Some of the merchant class are building what pass for mansions, 2 or even 3 floors, with parlours full of imported furniture and dining rooms with matching pewter plates. These homes might even have glass windows with actual curtains, tiled fireplaces, and a separate room for the children, which is considered extravagantly modern. Servants, sometimes enslaved, do the dirty work. The families live differently. Their homes don't leak. Their fires never go out. Their chamber pots are emptied by someone else. But even in these homes, the cold is a problem. New England winters laugh in the face of wooden walls. So people hang heavy curtains over doorways to trap heat, sleep in shifts near the hearth, and wake up with frost on their blankets. The fireplaces are enormous, but most of the heat goes straight up the chimney. You keep warm by baking, working, and never sitting still for too long. Debated historical detail time. Were these homes really as cold and miserable as the records suggest? Or is that a modern exaggeration? Some historians argue that people acclimated, that multiple layers of wool and smart home design made things manageable. Others point to journals and diaries full of complaints about freezing inkwells, frostbitten fingers, and indoor livestock brought in just to keep the temperature above murderous. Honestly, it was probably both. People adapted, but they still hated it. Still, despite all the drafts and rats and slop and snoring, your home is your anchor. It's where you keep your tools, your drying herbs, your stitched-up shoes and family Bible. It's where you tell stories by firelight, try to ignore the cold and fall asleep listening to the creak of timbers and the sea wind outside. It's not comfortable, not exactly, but it's yours. And as you step out again into the muddy streets, you glance back at the sagging doorway, the crooked shingles, the smoke curling from your chimney. Home, sweet drafty, noisy, chamber pot-scented home. You're dressed but not exactly ready, because getting dressed in 1700s Boston is less of a task and more of a full-body negotiation. Everything takes time. Everything has layers, and nothing is designed for speed. This isn't a world of hoodies and sneakers. It's a world of wool, leather, laces, pins, and patience. And if you're already running late, tough. Your stockings don't care. First things first, you pull on your undergarments. Not sexy, not optional. You start with a linen shift or shirt depending on your gender. It's the one piece of clothing you'll actually wash regularly. And you sleep in it too, which means it always smells faintly of sweat and hearth smoke. If you're a man, you might then add a pair of breeches, long, knee-length pants fastened with buttons or buckles, and a waistcoat. If you're a woman, you start layering with petticoats, 1, 2, maybe 3, depending more on how cold it is, how rich you are, and how much you want to look like you have status by sheer skirt volume. Now, the corset, or more accurately, stays. You don't wear them for beauty. Not exactly. They're meant to support your posture and shape your torso according to the fashion of the day, which favours a long, conical upper body and a dangerously high bust line. These things are stiff, literally. They're made of layers of fabric and whalebone stitched so tightly you could probably survive a bayonet poke. Lacing them up takes time and help. If you don't have a maid, a sister, or a very patient spouse, you're going to need some serious contortionist skills. Shoes are another test of your will to live. They're made of leather, sometimes wool with wooden soles or thin heels, and they're not comfortable. There's no left or right shoe, just foot-shaped, and your feet are expected to figure it out. If you're wealthy, your shoes might have small decorative buckles or bows. If you're not, you're lucky if they still have soles. And yes, you're going to wear them for the next 12 hours. For women, dressing your head is a social contract. You wear a cap, usually white linen or cotton, sometimes called a mob cap, to keep your hair clean and neat, or at least hidden. Hair is long, tied back, and rarely washed. You might pin it up if you're feeling fancy, but usually it's covered. No hat, no decency. And if you're married and bareheaded in public, you'll get stares. Or worse, comments. Men, on the other hand, style their hair back with pomade made of animal fat and powder it if they can afford it. Some wear wigs, but it's not universal yet. A good tricorn hat, however, is essential. It's a status marker, a portable roof, and a weapon in a strong enough wind. Lose your hat in the street and you've lost part of your dignity. And let's not forget accessories. Pockets aren't built into most garments. They're separate, tied around your waist under all the outer layers. That's right, ladies. The thing you need is always under 3 skirts. So when you need your thimble or your coins or that scrap of ribbon you swore you just had, you have to awkwardly dig through your side slits like you're trying to reach Narnia. Buttons are scarce and expensive. Pins and laces are more common. Everything fastens with ties, hooks, or drawstrings, and it will come loose. At the worst time. A wardrobe malfunction in colonial Boston means your shift peaks out or your stays loosen. Not that you're flashing anyone, but the scandal level is still high. Gossip spreads faster than disease around here, and if you leave your house looking rumpled, you'll hear about it at church, at market, and maybe even in the town records if someone gets truly petty. Quirky fact for the day: red petticoats are trendy. Bold, right? They're a splash of colour in a world that mostly wears dull browns, faded blues, and soot-stained whites. Red shows that you have a little flair, maybe a little coin, but not too much. Too much red, and someone might start whispering words like immoral or fast. Because fashion here is a balancing act. You want to look respectable, not prideful, distinct, not vain, otherwise someone's going to accidentally spill cider on your new apron. Now, let's address smell. Yes, everyone smells, but the trick is you don't talk about it. People wash their faces and hands daily, maybe. But full body bathing, that's rare. Water is cold, hard to haul, and might make you sick if you believe the popular medical opinions of the day. So instead they mask it. Herbs tucked into bodices, pomanders stuffed with cloves, lavender sachets in waistcoats. It doesn't work, but it helps. A little. The ongoing scholarly debate here: how did people actually feel in these clothes? Were they oppressive and exhausting, or just normal, so baked into daily life that no one questioned them? Some argue that people were proud of their garments, even the poor, because clothes were costly and handmade, passed down like heirlooms. Others say that the sheer discomfort, especially of stays and heavy wool, must have been constant. The truth? Probably both. You might grumble, but you still pull on that extra petticoat if you're going to town. Because appearances matter, and your neighbours are watching. Always. By the time you're dressed, truly dressed, you've probably already sweat through the back of your shirt from the fireplace heat, tightened your stays too much and stabbed yourself twice with a pin. You're stiff, restricted, and oddly presentable. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a small foggy pane of mirror glass. You look tired, but you look like you belong, and that's what matters. Because in 1700s Boston, what you wear is your resume, your identity, your protection. There are no clean slates, no fresh starts, no casual Fridays. Your clothes say where you're from, how much you earn, what you believe, and what you expect. One wrong stitch and you're out of place. One torn hem and you're poor, one missing cap and you're indecent. So you adjust your hat, tighten your laces, and step into the morning world as the version of yourself that your clothes insist you are. You don't feel comfortable, but you feel correct. And in this town, that's more important. The streets greet you, like an old, bitter acquaintance, familiar, foul-tempered, and always underfoot. You step carefully, because every inch of ground in 1700s Boston feels like a test. The dirt road isn't just dirt. It's a frothy blend of mud, horse droppings, stray hay, broken glass, rotten produce, and the occasional mystery goo. It rained last night, and now every pothole's a brown lagoon. You try to stick to the dry edges, where the ruts are shallower and the stench isn't actively fighting to crawl up your nostrils. The street is alive with movement. Chickens scatter under buttons, dogs bark at nothing, and pigs trot freely between piles of refuse like little hairy garbage collectors. You try not to make eye contact with a particularly smug-looking goat rooting through someone's discarded turnips. It's winning that battle. Boston's layout isn't helping you. This isn't a city born from blueprints or logic. It's more like a patchwork quilt stitched together by people who never spoke to one another. The roads curve because of old cow paths. Alleys appear where space allowed, not where space made sense. The town's built on hills and nothing is level. One moment you're walking steadily, the next your foot slips on a slick cobblestone, and you're 2 inches closer to falling on your face in front of your neighbour, who's already staring. The buildings loom close on either side like eavesdropping sentinels. Most are 2 or 3 stories, wooden frame jutting awkwardly into the street. Some have overhanging upper levels that feel like they are about to kiss or collide above your head. Laundry flaps from windows, gutters drip on your collar, and signs swing wildly on iron brackets. Symbols of trades, taverns, and things you didn't ask to smell this early in the morning. Carts rattle by, pulled by exhausted horses wearing blinders, hooves splashing up muck that no one wants to name. The teamster driving one of them doesn't bother to slow down for pedestrians. Why would he? You're just another obstacle. He yells something coarse, possibly at you, possibly at the mule, and vanishes into the fog ahead. You stop to let a group of schoolchildren pass, grimy-faced, half-dressed, and shouting rhymes you only half understand. One of them carries a hornbook, a small wooden paddle with printed letters pasted on it and covered in thin horn to protect the paper. The others have nothing. No bags, no books, just dirt under their nails and a vague sense of obligation. Education in Boston is technically required, for boys at least, but how seriously that's taken depends entirely on how close your family lives to a schoolhouse and whether your parents need your help at home. As you walk farther, the noise builds. Metal on metal clanks from a nearby blacksmith. A cooper's hammer pounds rhythmically, shaping barrels you'll eventually see stacked in ships or rolled down to the docks. The smells keep coming in waves. Fish, tar, smoke, dung, ale, stale bread, candle wax. Every breath is a gamble. Some windows are open, leaking music from a fiddle, and the squeak of someone tuning it just slightly wrong. A tavern's door bangs open, and two men stumble out, one laughing, the other bleeding from the eyebrow. It's not even noon. There's no such thing as clean in Boston. Dust gets into everything. If you wipe down your windowsill in the morning, by nightfall, it'll look like it's snowed ash. Chimney smoke clings to your clothes, your skin, your soul. The wind off the harbour helps, sometimes, bringing in the scent of salt and sea, but even that gets overwhelmed by the constant stew of humanity packed too tightly together. And here's a grim little detail. You can smell disease, not in the dramatic, rotting flesh way you're imagining, but in subtle ways. Sour, sickly, sharp. A neighbour's home that smells off. A person walking by who's sweating in the cold. The town has no hospitals, just almshouses and death. Watches. So when someone is visibly ill, people take wide detours, and if you sneeze twice in public, someone will mutter a prayer and avoid you for a week. Quirky fact of the day. Some homes have foot scrapers nailed next to the door, little iron grates meant to remove the worst of the street from your shoes before stepping inside. They don't work. They're optimism in iron form. Nothing short of divine intervention is cleaning the soles of your boots after a trip through town. At the centre of everything is the meeting house, sitting tall and judgmental. It's part church, part town hall, part social nucleus. Its bell rings not just for Sunday services, but for emergencies, deaths, and the occasional civic announcement. You pass it, and for a moment everything feels heavier. That's where the town watches from. That's where your sins might one day be read aloud. That's where reputations are made or shredded. There's a lot of walking in your life. No carriages unless you're wealthy. No horses unless you're wealthier. Most people get around on their own two sore, aching feet, and while distances aren't huge, Boston's still small by modern standards, the hills, mud, and lack of sidewalks make every journey feel like a trek. Add in the cold in winter, the heat in summer, and the delightful surprise of sudden weather changes, and you start to understand why people spend half the day just getting from one place to another. There's an ongoing historical debate over whether colonial Bostonians saw the street as public space or semi-private extension of their homes. Some evidence suggests it was more like an extension of your household, a place for gossip, business, children playing, and chickens roaming. Others argue that as the town grew, people began to retreat inside, seeing the street as dangerous or chaotic. The truth? It was both. Streets were where life happened, for better or worse. You couldn't avoid them, even if, honestly, you'd really, really like to. By the time you reach your destination, a shop, a neighbour's house, the dock, the market, you're already filthy. Your boots squelch. Your cloak smells worse than it did when you left. You've nodded to 6 people, avoided 2 confrontations, and seen at least one man relieving himself against a wall like it's a urinal. It wasn't. But hey, nobody said civilization was tidy, and as you glance down at the ground, at the half-buried bits of bow, the cracked oyster shells, the smeared hoofprint, you realise something. Boston's streets don't just get you where you're going. They wear you down. They mark you. And by the time you return home at the end of the day, you'll carry them with you, on your shoes, in your and your nose, and deep in your very bones. You're only a few steps into the market square when the shouting starts. Not angry shouting, though there's always some of that, but the rhythmic, theatrical cries of shopkeepers and hawkers who've turned yelling into an art form. It's not enough to just sell a thing in 1700s Boston. You have to announce it, chant it, pitch it like you're trying to wake the dead. You hear a voice calling, "Fine molasses, sweet as a sin, thick as a sermon," followed by a rival bellowing, "Apples, sound apples, no worms, no lies." The second part may or may not be true, depending on how recently the apples were inspected, or if they ever were. The marketplace is chaos distilled. It's loud, narrow, crowded, and packed with more smells than anyone knows should be subjected to before lunch. You've got fish vendors with wooden crates of cod, their eyes still cloudy and staring, scales glinting in the sunlight. You've got butchers with slabs of meat hanging on iron hooks, casually swatting away flies while holding cleavers that look like they've seen too much. And then there are the women, so many women, selling bread, milk, buttons, pins, candles, dried herbs, or whatever else could be hauled in from the countryside or scraped together from last week's surplus. Some have stalls, actual wooden structures with awnings and hooks and crude signs. Others just squat on the ground, goods spread out on rough cloth or in open baskets, their hands red from the cold and their voices hoarse from the effort. These women are the soul of the market, often widows, often poor, often sharper than any merchant in the city. They know prices better than your pocket does, and they can smell hesitation like wolves sniffing weakness. One calls to you now, waving a bunch of wilted turnip greens and promising they'll cook down sweet as spring. You pass her, politely, and head toward the baker. The scent of fresh bread is a rare mercy in this sensory battlefield. He's got brown loaves stacked in uneven towers, the tops brushed with molasses to give them shine. There's also hardtack, basically flour and water baked into edible bricks, and if your teeth are feeling brave, you might buy some. Behind him, a smaller child, maybe 12, is silently bagging the orders. An apprentice, which means he's probably been awake since before dawn, kneading dough with hands that haven't fully grown yet. Coin is useful here, but not always required. This is Boston, where barter thrives. You might trade eggs for candles, wool for grain, soap for dried apples. Credit is common too, though risky. If you're trusted, vendors will tally up your debts in a small notebook, or, for the illiterate, a notch stick. If you're not trusted, you pay up front, or you walk away empty-handed. Everyone knows who's good for it and who isn't. Reputation buys almost as much as silver. Now, let's talk about the shops. These aren't modern stores with shelves and piped-in music. They're extensions of someone's home, often the front room of a family's residence, with a counter, some barrels, and a whole lot of smell. A tanner's shop smells like death and vinegar. A cobbler's shop smells like leather, wet wood, and hard labour. You might find general goods stores selling everything from nails to nutmeg, but you'll pay more for imports. Items like sugar, spices, tea, and fabric are luxuries, carefully measured and displayed like rare treasure. There's a certain rhythm to all of this. People move like water, flowing around one another, pausing to haggle, argue, flirt, gossip. You hear snatches of conversation. Did you hear about the Jenkins boy? The governor's wife wore silk to meeting again. The preacher says the comet is a sign. It's news, religion, scandal, and economy all braided together in the same cobbled square. Quirky fact alert. Boston has what's called a crier, an actual official whose job is to walk the streets shouting out lost property, upcoming auctions, and legal notices. Imagine Siri with a bell and a bad temper. If someone finds a lost glove or horse or child, it happens, they give it to the crier to announce. You might hear him now. Found. A brown spaniel, damp and nervous, will bite. And while we're at it, here's another odd little truth. Swearing in public can get you fined. Profanity is technically illegal, so if someone curses over the price of mutton, the constable could actually arrest them. Or more likely just make a note and shame them later. Doesn't stop anyone from doing it. But it does mean they whisper their curses with a little more theatrical flair. By the devil's left boot, someone mutters behind you, kicking at a half-rotten cabbage, points for creativity. Now, not everything in the marketplace is above board. There's a black market undercurrent here, subtle but ever-present. Smuggled goods, stolen items, off-the-books trades. Boston's port is wide open to trade with England and the Caribbean, and not all of it passes through official hands. Someone offers you a jar of rum for half price. It's probably watered down. Someone offers you tobacco with no tax seal. It's definitely smuggled. The city relies on this stuff, even if it pretends not to see it. There's also street performance. A fiddler balancing on a barrel. A man juggling knives while calling himself the Devil's Apprentice. A woman reading palms with suspicious accuracy for someone who definitely isn't supposed to believe in magic. You stop to watch, drop a penny into the hat. For a moment, It feels almost festive. Almost. Historical fact for the day. Boston had one of the earliest public markets in the colonies, with the official Faneuil Hall Market arriving a bit later, in 1742. But even before that, street markets like this thrived in central squares and along key streets. Some were sanctioned, others popped up wherever someone stood still long enough with something to sell. The city tolerated them, barely, because they kept people fed, even when they blocked the road and left fish guts on the cobblestones. And here's a debate scholars keep chewing on. How much of the economy was really driven by women? Officially, most records center men, merchants, traders, officials. But dig deeper, and you find that widows, wives, and even unmarried women ran shops, sold goods, managed accounts, and often made up the majority of the market's activity. Many historians now argue that Boston's economy functioned as much on the shoulders of its women as its ships. You spend longer than you meant to in the market. You sample a dried fig from a tray, and try not to think about how many hands touched it. You buy a small wedge of cheese wrapped in waxed cloth. You haggle over a spool of thread, lose, then haggle again just for the thrill of it. Finally, with your basket a little fuller and your purse a little lighter, you turn back toward the street. As you step over a discarded eelhead and dodge a small child chasing a runaway chicken, you realize something. The market isn't just a place to buy things. It's where Boston happens. It's loud and messy and blunt, yes, but it's also alive. Every word, every trade, every sidelong glance is a thread in the city's unravelling tapestry. And today you've sewn yourself into it just a little deeper. You think you've made it out of the market clean. Maybe a little smudged, sure, and smelling like smoked fish and boiled onions, but generally intact. Then your foot lands wrong, just wrong enough, and sinks with a truly disturbing squelch into something thick, brown, and suspiciously warm. You freeze. You do not look down. You know what it is. It's not worth verifying. Welcome to trash management in 1700s Boston. A complex system of hoping the rain takes care of it. The truth is there is no such thing as garbage removal here. Not in any modern sense. There's no coordinated effort. No teams of workers in matching coats collecting bags curbside. There aren't even bags. There are buckets, pits, open windows, and that weirdly communal understanding that when it comes to waste, it's everybody's problem, and therefore nobody's. You see it everywhere. Rotting vegetables tossed from second-story kitchens, bones and shells in heaps behind shops. Animal hides left too long outside the tanner's shop until they stiffen into horror. Dead rats left in the street like tiny bloated warnings. And the smell? Oh, the smell is a living thing, sweet and sour and sharp and old, and it hits you in waves, riding the wind like a curse. You start breathing through your mouth, which is somehow worse. And it's not just food waste, Eden. You pass a puddle that you hope is rainwater. But given the yellowish tint and the way it's bubbling slightly in the sun, you're not placing bets. Chamber pots get emptied wherever's closest, into alleys, into drains, sometimes just right into the street. "Gardyloo," they yell from the windows, and you better move fast or get blessed by a stranger's digestive decisions. It's a social system that only barely works. Boston has no sewage infrastructure. No pipes, no drains, no underground miracle network to carry away the sins of the city. Some buildings have cesspits, literal pits dug into the ground to collect human waste. But they fill quickly and overflow, especially in summer. Occasionally they get emptied by men called night soil collectors, who haul the mess away in barrels after dark. But most people can't afford that, and besides it smells worse stirred. So things pile up, slowly, relentlessly. You pass by the back of a tavern, and it's a horror show. Broken mugs, crusted food, chicken bones, and something that might once have been stew now congealed into a paste. A rat scurries by, bold and unbothered. You nod in respect. It owns this part of the town. Quirky fact time, ashes are considered a multi-purpose household product. Got a mess? Throw ashes on it? Need to mop up a spill? Ashes? Need to cover a smell? Ashes again. It doesn't work well, but it gives people the illusion of cleanliness, which in 1700s Boston is about as close to real cleanliness as you're going to get. And speaking of illusions, there is an effort by the city to maintain public order. Officials known as scavengers are appointed to oversee waste management in various wards. That sounds promising until you realise their job is mostly to tell people what not to do with their trash, with no real power to enforce anything. If they catch someone dumping refuse in a public lane, they might issue a fine. More likely they'll just yell about it until the person stops, or until they give up and walk away. Sometimes, when things get really bad, the town calls for a general cleanup. Neighbours are expected to band together and haul garbage into designated pits or burn it in a communal blaze. These events are loud, smoky, and never entirely successful, but they're something. A group effort to pretend the ground isn't slowly becoming an archaeological layer of filth. And then there's the harbour, Boston's convenient little wastebasket. It's not uncommon for trash, animal remains, spoiled food, and the occasional dead pet to get pitched straight into the water. Out of sight, out of mind, except the harbour smells it. And every time the tide turns, it brings the mess back like an untrained dog. Seaweed tangled with cloth, crates of garbage bobbing near the docks, fish that look off. You cross a footbridge over a drainage ditch. The water is black, not dark, black. You glance down and see something floating, a shoe maybe, or a potato. You keep walking. There's a scholar fight over just how bad it really was. Some argue that the city's waste problems were exaggerated by later historians looking to make a point about progress. Others insist it was as revolting as the records suggest, maybe worse, especially in the poorer wards. Diaries from the time describe summer air so thick with rot that people fled inland if they could. One entry simply reads, "The smell has a taste now." Poetry. Still, it wasn't all complete chaos. Some households took pride in keeping things tidy, at least by local standards. You would see swept stoops, rinsed pots, even flower boxes above the worst of the stink. These were the people who threw their waste farther, made better garde-à-lou announcements, and scowled at anyone who dumped trash near their door. Community standards, such as they were, formed block by block, enforced with pointed glares and verbal shaming. Of course, none of this stopped the rats. Boston is a rat's paradise. Warm fires, endless food, no real predators except the occasional overconfident cat. You see them darting into cellars, squeezing through cracks, nesting in piles of discarded rope and cloth. They're a fact of life. You don't scream when you see one. You just hope it doesn't die inside your wall. But the real danger isn't what you see, it's what you can't. Miasmas. People say bad air that makes you sick. And in a way, they're right. Bacteria haven't been discovered yet, but people have learned that where there's filth, there's illness. So they burn herbs, light pine cones, and hang bundles of dried lavender and sage by their doors. It smells better, sure, but it won't keep the fever away. By the time you make it back home, your boots are caked, your hem is stained, and your sense of smell is begging for mercy. You scrape off what you can using the little iron foot scraper by your door. It helps, a little, and splash your hands with cold water from the bucket. You're not clean, you'll never be clean, but you're less unclean, and that's as good as it gets. You step inside, close the door, and let the scent of wood smoke and old bread replace the world outside. The filth is still out there, waiting, seeping deeper into the cobbles and corners. But for now, you're safe, or safe enough. You don't walk far before a steeple cuts, through the sky ahead, a sharp white finger pointing toward heaven, or maybe just a reminder to behave. Boston in the 1700s isn't just religious, it is religion. Faith here isn't something you do on Sundays. It's something that shapes your laws, your food, your wardrobe, your schedule, and your neighbour's opinion of your immortal soul. You can't escape it, not even in your sleep if you snore too loudly. Someone will say it's a sign of moral decay. The Puritans laid this place down like a sermon on wood and stone. Their influence, still lingering long after their peak, flows through every brick of the meeting houses and every sigh of the ministers leaning into their pulpits. In fact, church isn't even the right word here. These are meeting houses, stark rectangular multi-purpose buildings with no icons, no stained glass, no ornamentation, just long hard benches and longer harder sermons. You've probably sat through one, hours of it. In winter you freeze on a wooden pew. In summer you stew in your own sweat while flies buzz through the open windows. Children squirm, adults pretend they're not nodding off. The preacher drones on, voice rising and falling like a ship in rough seas, warning of eternal damnation, of fire and brimstone, of the peril of wearing bright-coloured stockings. It's not entertainment, it's endurance. Now, let's say you live in Boston proper. That means you likely belong, at least officially, to one of the major congregations, like the Old South Meeting House or the First Church. These are centres of civic life, not just places of worship. Elections are held here, town meetings happen here, disputes get aired here, sometimes publicly, sometimes loudly. The line between civil and sacred, it's so thin, it's practically see-through. And let's be clear, this is Protestantism in its most rigid, bone-hard form. No dancing, no theatre, no holidays really. Christmas? Still controversial actually. Too Catholic, too frivolous. Most folks just pretend it doesn't exist. If you hang a wreath or sing a carol, you might get side-eyed or sermoned at. You feel it when you walk the streets, this silent theology. People keep their voices low, no one laughs too loud. There's always this undercurrent of moral pressure. Be good, or at least look like you're trying. Even your clothes are a statement of belief. Muted tones, modest cuts, sensible shoes. Luxury is frowned upon unless you're a merchant, and even then you better make it look like it's for business, not pleasure. Here's the quirky bit. Despite all the official piety, people still party. Not openly, not loudly, but in the back rooms of taverns, in coastal villages just far enough from town, in whispers and winks and late-night gatherings. The pressure occasionally gives way to celebration. Weddings turn into dance halls after the preacher leaves. Harvest festivals sneak in under the guise of community dinners. And funerals, surprisingly lively. Apparently confronting mortality unlocks a bit of merriment. Just don't get caught enjoying yourself too obviously. Boston's puritanical roots don't just dictate behaviour, they shape architecture too. The meeting houses are plain and severe, designed to remind you that life is short and God is not amused. Homes reflect this, with symmetrical facades and tiny, evenly spaced windows. Nothing fancy, nothing indulgent. Ornamentation suggests vanity, and vanity is a gateway to sin. So you decorate your home with thrift and silence, maybe a sampler stitched with a Bible verse. Maybe. But even within this rigid system, cracks are forming. The early 1700s are the beginning of Boston's spiritual shift. Anglican churches are popping up, backed by England and its crown-loving ways. Their services are a little flashier, singing, formal liturgy, actual vestments. It causes no small amount of tension. To the Puritans, these Anglicans might as well be Catholics with better manners. To the Anglicans, the Puritans are stuck in a world of sackcloth and scowls. It's not just a theological difference, it's political. Aligning with one church or another says something about your loyalty, your education, even your economic ambitions. The Anglican churches tend to attract the wealthy, the well-connected, and the upwardly mobile. Meanwhile, the older Puritan congregations are increasingly fragmented, wrestling with how to stay relevant in a town growing louder, richer, and less predictable by the day. This is where the scholars jump in. They argue over whether religion in early 1700s Boston was still the dominant force it once was, or if secularization was quietly slipping in through the cracks. Some point to declining church attendance and the rise of trade-focused values as signs that Boston was losing its Puritan backbone. Others say that even if practice declined, the worldview, the moral frame, still dominated every decision, from court rulings to street behaviour. Most likely both are true. The city is changing, but its roots are deep. You can leave the meeting house, but the meeting house doesn't leave you. You walk past a small chapel, hear a hymn leaking through the shutters. The melody is slow minor key and sung with that particular New England strain, part worship, part dirge. You pause for a moment, not to listen exactly, but because everyone else pauses too. Out of respect, or habit. It's hard to tell which, and that's the thing about religion here. It's not just practiced, it's lived. You feel it in the quiet of Sunday mornings, when even the dogs seem to bark less. You feel it in the courthouse, where laws are interpreted through scripture. You feel it in your neighbour's knock when they show up to check on your soul, because they heard you skipped meeting twice in a row. Quirky side note? The Puritans were obsessed with naming. Not just their children, though. Yes, names. Like patience, deliverance, and experience are real, but also places. There's a reason Boston has streets named Joy and Salem, but also milk, or water, and fish. It's practical, sure, but also spiritual. To name something is to give it purpose, and in this town, purpose is everything. You reach the town square just as the bell chimes noon. People pause. It's not just a marker of time, it's a sacred interruption. A reminder that your life is being counted, hour by hour, by something greater than your errands and arguments. You bow your head just a little, not because you're especially devout, but because everyone else is doing it. And in 1700s Boston, that's sometimes reason enough. You spot the schoolhouse before you hear it, which is lucky, because once you're within earshot, it sounds like chaos. A low, rhythmic droning of recited letters and numbers hums through the crooked windows, interrupted now and then by the sharp crack of a ruler or the booming voice of the schoolmaster delivering a correction, a command, or possibly a threat. The building itself is unremarkable, a squat, weather-darkened rectangle of wood that looks more like a storage shed than a centre of learning. But make no mistake, this is where futures are forged, or at least forced into shape. School in 1700s Boston is serious business, and not in a spirit of curiosity and exploration kind of way. No, this is education with the side of discipline, a heavy pour of religion, and just enough fear to keep the ink flowing and the heads down. You step inside and are immediately hit by the scent of smoke, damp wool, ink, and the sour tang of unwashed boys who've been sitting too close together for too long. Desks are just planks, really. Long benches with slanted writing surfaces, gouged and stained from generations of students who definitely did not appreciate the value of a proper education. There's no chalkboard, no globe, just a single table at the front where the schoolmaster presides, quill in hand, jaw clenched in what seems to be permanent disappointment. His wig is slightly askew, one of his stockings has fallen down. He looks like he hasn't smiled since the Glorious Revolution. Boys recite their lessons in unison. A is for Adam, who by sin fell. It's the New England primer, of course, the cornerstone of early American education. Equal parts ABCs and theology. You don't just learn your letters here, you learn your place in the universe. God made you. You sinned. Now sit still and try to remember how to spell repentance. If you're a boy of the right class and colour, school is mandatory. In fact, Massachusetts passed laws requiring towns of a certain size to maintain schools as early as the mid-1600s. Education here isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, because reading the Bible is considered essential to moral survival. If you can't read scripture, how can you save your soul? So, boys learn early. By 5 or 6, you're expected to recite letters, write your name and start copying psalms in shaky script with an ink-stained quill. The girls? That's a different story. Technically, they can be taught to read, and many are. But writing, that's often reserved for boys. Writing is power. Writing means contracts, sermons, laws. Girls can know enough to manage a household Bible and read a recipe, but too much literacy. That's suspicious. What would a girl do with a pen anyway? Start asking questions? There are exceptions, of course. Wealthy families sometimes hire private tutors for their daughters, especially if there's no son in the picture. A well-read woman is seen as a mild flex in some social circles, so long as she keeps her cleverness tucked behind embroidery hoops and polite silence. But for the most part, boys get the ink, girls get the spinning wheel. You watch as one student stands to read a passage aloud. His voice shakes. He misses a word. The room goes quiet. The schoolmaster rises, slowly, theatrically, and walks over, his heels clicking ominously against the floorboards. There's a long pause, then a correction delivered in that tight, cold tone that makes you want to sink into the floor. The boy sits down red-faced and miserable. Learning here often involves humiliation. Let's talk punishments. The ruler across the knuckles is just the beginning. There's also the dunce cap for when your mistakes need to be displayed. A paper cone slapped on your head, forcing you to sit in the corner while others snicker. Then there's standing on the log, where a child has to balance silently on a wooden beam for what feels like hours. Or the whisper stick, a long rod waved between students who dare to talk out of turn. The schoolmaster has a whole arsenal, and he wields it like he's teaching combat rather than conjugation. Quirky fact for the day. Some teachers used goose feathers, not just for writing, but for punishment. A sharpened quill, flicked just right, leaves a nasty welt and reminds you that learning is supposed to hurt. And in case you think that's dark, some schools had a whipping boy, a child who'd take punishment on behalf of another if the latter was too delicate or socially untouchable. Nothing says teamwork like shared trauma. But not everything in this room is grim. There's curiosity here too, bubbling under the surface. A boy in the corner scribbles something extra in the margin of his copybook. A sketch of a ship, maybe, or a crude caricature of the schoolmaster with steam coming out of his ears. Another child recites a verse perfectly and gets a rare nod of approval. These are small victories, but they matter. Good mark might mean praise at home, a future apprenticeship, or at least one night of not being told you're an embarrassment to your ancestors. As the class continues, the students cycle through the day's subjects. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and always scripture. There are no science experiments, no art classes, no creative writing prompts. The goal isn't expression, it's control. Education is meant to make you useful, obedient, and ideally godly. If you want music, you'll find it in church. If you want dancing, well, don't. That's frowned upon. The schoolroom itself reflects this philosophy. It's drafty, undecorated, and austere. The windows are small, not to keep you warm, but to keep you focused. The fire in the hearth sputters low, not out of neglect, but because fuel costs money and distractions cost souls. Everything in here whispers the same thing. Learn fast, behave better, and fear the man at the front of the room. There's a scholarly debate, of course, about how effective this system actually was. Some argue it produced highly literate, disciplined citizens who went on to build the intellectual backbone of early America. Others point out that it also produced generations of anxious, rigid thinkers who equated learning with fear. Both are probably true. You can admire the results and still wince at the methods. As the class wraps up, the children stand for a final recitation, a psalm chanted in tired unison, and then the schoolmaster dismisses them with a curt nod. They scramble out the door like it's on fire. A few toss you wary glances, unsure whether you're a parent, a neighbour, or some new kind of inspector. You smile slightly. One girl sticks out her tongue before dashing away. You like her. You step back into the light, the drone of school behind you fading into the hum of the street. Another generation is being shaped in that room, shaped hard, shaped fast, shaped with ink and fear and repetition. And whether they grow up to be ministers or merchants or midwives, they'll carry the sound of that classroom inside them forever. Somewhere behind you a rooster crows again, midday, and it still hasn't figured out how time works. You ignore it, stepping into the cool shade of a narrow side street where the buildings lean close enough to whisper. Here, the noise of Boston dulls slightly. The clatter of carts and the shouts from the market are muffled by walls and laundry, and the smell of someone boiling cabbage a little too enthusiastically. This is a domestic street. You've walked into women's territory now. In 1700s Boston, a woman's work isn't just a phrase. It's a life sentence. It's not 9 to 5. It's not leaning ins, and that area there is no such thing as retirement. The labour is constant, repetitive, uncelebrated, and utterly essential. Everything you see around you, clothing, food, light, heat, medicine, passes through a woman's hands before it ever touches anyone else's. You knock on a friend's door, and when she opens it, she's up to her elbows in bread dough. Of course she is. Step into her home, and it's a workshop, not a sanctuary. There's a baby strapped to her chest with a ragged shawl, a pot boiling over the hearth, a spindle leaning in the corner, and 2 half-mended shirts draped across the back of a chair. If she's lucky, an older daughter is sweeping ash from the fireplace while a younger one plucks feathers from a chicken that very recently stopped being a chicken. The air smells like yeast and wood smoke and a bit of panic. Every woman here works. Even if she's rich enough to have a servant, or multiple, she's still managing her household, training the girls under her roof, ordering supplies, keeping the books, and maintaining the fragile balance of comfort and survival. For most women, though, there's no time for management. There's just work. Every hour, every day. Start with the basics. Food. In a world without refrigeration, women are constantly preparing, preserving, or preventing food from going bad. They bake bread daily, brew beer, boil stew, churn butter, dry herbs, salt meat, and smoke fish. They know how long a turnip can sit before it turns traitorous. They know which part of a pig should never go in the pot. And they know how to make eel taste like something other than eel. Their recipes aren't written down, they're memorized, passed from mother to daughter like sacred spells. Then there's clothing. Every item of clothing you're wearing right now, a woman made that. She spun the wool, wove the thread, dyed it with crushed plants and insects, cut it with dull scissors, and stitched it by hand while squinting in candlelight. She made your stockings, your shirt, your cap. If it tears, she'll fix it. If it shrinks, she'll beat it back into shape with a wooden paddle and some regret. And she'll do it all while listening to her children argue about whose turn it is to fetch water. Quirky fact of the day, many women kept small pots of lye soap going year-round. Not because they were obsessed with cleanliness, they weren't, but because lye was useful for laundry, dishwashing, and occasionally scaring off mice with the fumes. Making it was dangerous. Too much lye could burn your skin off. But it got the job done. Barely. You watch as a woman across the lane empties a basin of grey water into the gutter, wipes her hands on her apron, then dives straight into a bucket of unwashed linen. Her knuckles are red and raw. The soap stings. She doesn't flinch. There's too much to do. Some women also earn money, quietly. A midwife, for example, is a vital, respected figure. She knows everyone's secrets. She helps bring babies into the world, and she helps bury them when things go wrong. She walks to homes at midnight, hands calloused and calm. She carries herbs, boiled tools, and centuries of whispered knowledge. And she's paid for it. In coin if the family can afford it. In food or firewood if they can't. Other women keep borders, run small dairies, or sew for wealthier families. Some sell goods at the market, candles, spun thread, buttons, simple medicines. And a few, those brave or desperate enough, take in laundry from half the neighbourhood. You pass a backyard where shirts hang like ghosts on a line. The woman stirring a massive pot of boiling linen looks up and gives you a nod. She's the reason half of Boston doesn't smell worse than it already does. But here's the thing. None of this labour is considered extraordinary. It's expected. It's invisible. If you collapse from exhaustion, someone might comment on how you weren't raised right. If your bread burns, it becomes a reflection of your moral character. Domestic skill and virtue are intertwined so tightly that failure in one is seen as failure in both. A well-run home is a sign of godliness. A messy one, sin, laziness, or worse, independent thinking. This is where the scholar debate kicks in. How much agency did colonial women really have? Some argue that the home was their kingdom, their place of power, where they ruled with unmatched authority. Others point out that everything they did, from cooking to childbirth, was still under the scrutiny and control of a patriarchal system that denied them legal identity, property rights, or the ability to vote or hold office. So yes, they ruled, but only over the domestic cage they were given. Religion makes it murkier. Women are expected to be obedient, modest, soft-spoken, but they're also expected to be spiritual leaders within the home, to teach the children, to pray daily, to hold everyone together when the world outside gets too loud or too cruel. It's a strange blend of submission and power, and each woman navigates it differently. Some comply. Some rebel in quiet, clever ways. Some take their strength from the work itself, their fingers busy even when their minds wander far beyond the walls of the home. You step outside again and hear laughter. Not shrill or showy, just a ripple of amusement from a group of women shelling peas and sharing gossip in a shared courtyard. One of them swats her toddler away from the fire pit without missing a beat in the story she's telling. It's not all drudgery. There's community here. There's comfort. Sometimes even joy. A woman passes you carrying a bundle of cloth nearly her size. Her back is straight, her stride fast, her expression set to don't even try. She doesn't nod, she doesn't smile. She's working. Everyone here is. And as you walk past spinning wheels and stew pots and piles of folded linen, you feel the weight of a truth that never makes it into the official town records. That while men are arguing in town meetings and building ships and writing sermons, the women are doing everything else, holding the fabric of the city together one stitch, one loaf, one berth at a time. You follow the sound of laughter and the unmistakable slam of a tavern door opening and closing like a heartbeat. It's not even evening yet, but the taverns are already coming alive, because in 1700s, Boston, men don't wait until sunset to blow off steam. You turn a corner and there they are, groups of men clustered around barrels, on stoops, in doorways with rolled-up sleeves and tankards already half empty. Some are merchants with ink-stained fingers, others are labourers, faces ruddy from wind and smoke, and a few are sailors, easy to spot by the way they swagger, like the ground still moves under their feet. This is their domain, a space carved out between dockwork and domestic expectation, where men can be loud, opinionated, contradictory, and slightly drunk. Sometimes very drunk. Boston's men, despite all the Puritan rigidity, are big on alehouses and conversation. They argue politics they barely understand, recount fish that were definitely this big, and trade jokes too crude to say at church, but not crude enough to skip repeating. If you're a man, your day is likely split between labour and loitering. Trade defines your role. Are you a craftsman? A blacksmith? Cobbler? cooper or carpenter. Then you spend your daylight hours hammering, planing, sewing, or swearing, often all at once. Your hands are thick and calloused, your back is sore, and your clothes are permanently dusted in whatever material your trade requires. You learn young, often as an apprentice to someone stricter than your father, and by adulthood, your craft becomes your identity. Not just what you do, but who you are. If you're a merchant, your world is measured in barrels and ledgers. You buy, sell, haggle, import, export, and schmooze. You read newspapers voraciously and write letters with sweeping, self-important loops. You might wear a finer coat made of imported wool dyed so dark it almost glows blue. You speak with a bit more authority, and when you enter a tavern, you head straight to the back room, where the best deals and worst secrets are passed between mugs. Then there are the seamen. The harbour brings them in like clockwork, sunburned, half sober, hands tough as rope with stories more colourful than their clothing. They work the ships that make Boston a port city of real significance. They load and unload cargo, scrub decks, climb masts, and occasionally disappear for months or years at a time. When they're home, they drink like they're trying to catch up on everything they missed. And of course, if you're an elite man, wealthy, landed, politically connected, you don't work with your hands, you supervise, you manage interests. Maybe you own part of a shipping company. Maybe you inherited property or slaves. You're likely part of the town's leadership, and you spend your days in meetings, planning, networking, and making sure your name stays respectable and your heirs don't embarrass you. You might even own the tavern everyone else is drinking in. You step into one now, the door creaks, the air thickens, and the atmosphere changes like you've crossed into another layer of the world. The tavern is dim and close, lit by tallow candles and the flickering fire in the hearth. The smell is intense. Ale, sweat, smoke, stale bread, and the faint tang of something pickled that probably shouldn't be. A few men nod as you walk in, others eye you for a beat and go back to their dice game. Taverns in Boston aren't just places to drink, they're community hubs. Business gets done here. News spreads here. You can learn more in an hour at the bar than in a week at church. One man is arguing about sugar prices, another whispers something about troop movements near the frontier. A third is swearing that he saw a sea serpent off the coast. It had teeth, he says. Spoke Latin, he says. Nobody corrects him. Quirky fact, taverns were also used for official business. Elections, court proceedings, even town meetings sometimes took place in tavern rooms. Nothing says democracy quite like voting while slightly hammered on Applejack. And because the line between private and public is blurry here, you might have someone singing sea shanties in one room while a judge hands down a verdict in the next. Multitasking colonial style. Of course, not everyone drinks the same thing. Beer is for the masses, thick, dark and warm. Cider is popular, sweet or dried, depending on the orchard and the year. Rum, though, is king. Imported from the Caribbean, often in exchange for molasses or slaves, it's the drink of sailors and rebels alike. Strong, cheap and reliable. Men drink it straight, mix it with water, or blend it into flip, a concoction of beer, rum, sugar and eggs heated with a red-hot poker straight from the fire. The hiss and sizzle is half the fun, the hangover, less so. Now this is where it gets complicated. Not all men are welcome everywhere. Race, class and accent play a role in where you're allowed to drink and how people treat you while you do. Enslaved men, even if permitted in taverns, are there under tight surveillance. Free black men may find some measure of acceptance in the poorer areas of town, but it's limited, always conditional. Native men are treated with suspicion or hostility unless they're trading, and even then, the mood can sour fast. And if you're a known loyalist, someone suspected of being too cosy with the British, you drink in quiet corners, preferably behind closed doors. Politics are starting to heat up. Not revolution yet, but the temperature's rising. People listen carefully. Opinions get noticed. You don't want to be remembered as the man who toasted the wrong king. A historian's debate here, how much did taverns really shape public opinion? Some argue they were the birthplaces of rebellion, the first places where colonists imagined themselves as something separate from England. Others think that's romantic hindsight and that most tavern talk was just that. Talk, fueled by alcohol and bravado, forgotten by morning. Still, there's no denying that in these rooms, seeds were planted. Of resistance, of identity, of shared frustration over taxation governance and the way the empire looked down its powdered nose at the colonies. You stay a while, long enough to see the barkeep chase out a man who tried to pay with bad coin, long enough to overhear a sailor spinning a tale about pirates off the coast of Maine, long enough to realise that the tavern is like a mirror, reflecting all of Boston's tensions, hopes and hungers. It's where men go to remember who they are, and forget, just a little, how hard life can be. You step back out into the afternoon sun, your boots crunch on broken shells, your head slightly light from the smell of beer-soaked pine. The day still has work left in it, but the tavern stays with you. The warmth of the fire, the buzz of voices, the brief illusion of freedom. In a town ruled by laws and sermons and social scrutiny, this place, however imperfect, offers men something rare, a moment to breathe. The house doesn't look any different from the others. On the street, timber-framed, steep-roofed, a bit warped from the winters. Smoke rises from the chimney. A child's voice sings somewhere out back, and laundry hangs limply in the late afternoon breeze. It's an ordinary home in 1700s Boston, but step inside and you'll see it. The presence that's always there but rarely spoken about. A young woman at the hearth who isn't a daughter. A manservant clearing the table who isn't paid. A child whose hands work but whose name isn't entered in the family Bible. Slavery here is woven into the household, quietly, persistently and inescapably. It's a common misconception that slavery was a southern institution. The reality? Boston had slaves. Not by the hundreds on sprawling plantations, but by the dozens, sometimes just one or two per household, embedded into daily life like furniture that also bled. They were mostly of African descent, sometimes indigenous, often purchased through networks tied directly to the city's port. These were lives bought with rum, traded like nails and sugar, written into wills and inventories alongside pewter dishes and feather beds. You watch a woman carry a pail of water into the house, her steps practiced and silent. She doesn't look up, she's about 17. Her apron is soaked, her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Her name might be Dinah or Phyllis or Flora, common names for enslaved women in this city. Her day started before dawn and will end long after her owners have gone to bed. She cooks, cleans, washes, sews, tends to the children, and still gets accused of laziness if she pauses to catch her breath. There's a man in the stable too, brushing down a horse with more care than he'll ever be shown. His name might be Pompey, Cuffy, or Nero, names forced on him by owners trying to keep classical illusions fashionable. He's strong, fast, and terrifyingly aware that every move he makes is being watched. If he runs, there's nowhere to hide. Boston's tight-knit structure means a runaway won't get far unless he's helped, and helping is illegal. This is the uncomfortable truth. The northern colonies profited from slavery just as much as the South, only differently. Boston didn't have cotton fields or rice plantations, but it had ships, sugar refineries, and merchants who grew rich off the triangle trade. Molasses came up from the Caribbean, produced by enslaved labour, got distilled into rum in Boston, and was shipped back out to buy more slaves. Round and round it went, and everyone got paid. Except the people at the centre of it all. And the laws? They are there, tucked into the town records like footnotes with bite. Slaves in Massachusetts had almost no rights. They could not marry legally, testify against white people in court or own property. Abuse and separation from family were not only common, they were legal. Families were split as easily as any other assets. A man might be sold south, a woman rented out to another household, a child gifted to a cousin in Connecticut. No say, no recourse. Now here's the twist. The 1700s also saw a rise in enslaved people converting to Christianity. Some were forced, some chose it, some used it as a way to gain favour or carve out a sense of identity. You pass a small chapel where an enslaved boy, perhaps 10 or 11, stands in the back pew. He isn't given a seat. He recites scripture in perfect rhythm. The same preacher who taught his master now teaches him, sort of. The lesson is obedience, patience, heaven as reward for suffering. There's debate among scholars about how much religious instruction was sincere versus manipulative. Some ministers genuinely believed in the spiritual equality of enslaved people. Others used scripture as a leash. Verses about serving masters and turning the other cheek were emphasized heavily. Equality before God was whispered. Hierarchy on earth was shouted. Quirky detail for today, Boston once held baptism parades, where enslaved converts were walked to church in a procession that doubled as public spectacle and theological display. It was supposed to show the community's piety. What it actually showed was the uncomfortable line between soul-saving and social control. There were moments of rebellion, of course, subtle ones. An extra ladle of soup hidden for a hungry friend, a piece of lace sewn with a secret symbol. A prayer whispered in a language the master didn't understand. Open resistance was rare. It was punished brutally. But quiet survival? That was constant. Every day was a balancing act of staying safe and staying human. Free black people existed in Boston too. Some had purchased their freedom, others were born free. They worked as labourers, sailors, seamstresses, and sometimes even owned small property. But even they lived under a cloud of suspicion. Laws restricted their movements, barred them from certain jobs, and allowed for their re-enslavement if they couldn't prove their status. One missing paper could mean the end of everything. You pass a home where a black woman works in the garden, face set in that expressionless mask that keeps questions away. Inside, a white woman tells a friend how good she is, how obedient, how clever, like she's talking about a dog. You feel your jaw tighten, even though you're just a visitor in this place, floating along the surface of history. It's one of the many moments in 1700s Boston when you feel that sharp divide between what people want to remember and what they chose to ignore. And here's another layer. Some enslaved people were educated, especially in wealthier homes, where the enslaved were expected to read prayers aloud or assist in bookkeeping. Phyllis Wheatley, the famed black poet of the 18th century, lived right here in Boston. She was enslaved, taught to read and write, and published poetry admired by revolutionaries and royalty alike. Her existence was both exceptional and a reminder there was brilliance in bondage, ignored by those who saw only labour. You leave the side street and rejoin the broader flow of the city, where the faces blur and the stories get buried under noise and routine. But the presence lingers. In the doorways, in the kitchens, in the shadows of homes that would rather pretend they built themselves. You can't walk a block in Boston without passing someone whose life was owned by another. And yet most people keep walking. That's the power of a system built on silence. It works best when everyone agrees not to look too closely. And in 1700s Boston, slavery isn't a secret. It's a foundation, a quiet, daily, brutal truth that holds up the facade of a city on the rise. The cough starts as a tickle in your throat, annoying but ignorable. A bit of soot in the air maybe, or the damp chill that's been seeping into your clothes since morning. But by nightfall it's a full rattle in your chest, every breath. Sharp and dry, you try not to think about it. In 1700s Boston, getting sick isn't a detour, it's a gamble. And the odds? Not great. Illness is part of the city's rhythm, just like the tide or the church bell. Someone is always sick. Somewhere in town a child burns with fever, a sailor is vomiting in a bucket, a woman is slipping into labour too early. And most of the time people just hope it passes. There are no hospitals, none you'd want to walk into anyway. No understanding of germs, bacteria, or the importance of washing your hands before digging around in someone's insides. Medicine in Boston is equal parts tradition, guesswork, and a little prayer that whatever's growing in your gut will lose interest and move on. You pass a home marked by a small black ribbon tied to the door handle. It's subtle, but everyone knows what it means. Illness inside, not necessarily death, but it's circling. The neighbours cross themselves or offer quick, wordless glances of sympathy. No one steps close. Step inside one of these sick rooms and you're met with a mix of heat, herbs and fear. The bed's been dragged near the hearth. The windows are closed to keep out bad air, though that only makes the room stuffier and more claustrophobic. A girl lies under a mountain of quilts, cheeks flushed, lips dry. Her mother spoons something bitter into her mouth while whispering encouragement. Is it a fever? Measles? The pox? In most cases, no one knows. There's no diagnosis, only symptoms, suffering, and a shelf of hope stacked beside the bed. And then there's the bloody flux. You hear the term spoken in hushed tones. It's what we'd now call dysentery, brutal diarrhea, dehydration, and death by exhaustion. It sweeps through households fast, often in the summer, when the water turns from not great to actively trying to kill you. The flux is terrifying because it strips people down in days. One day they're out at market. 3 days. Later you're carrying their body to the burying ground in a pine box. Quirky fact, There was a strong belief that illness came from imbalances of humours, blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. Too much of one, you might feel melancholic, angry or plagued with boils. The solution? Restore balance, obviously. This meant bleeding, purging, blistering, and in a real crowd pleaser, cupping. That's where heated glass cups are suctioned to your skin to draw out the illness. It doesn't work, but it leaves impressive welts, so at least you look like you're suffering nobly. When you really needed help, you called for a physician, if you could afford one. If there was one nearby. Most towns had maybe 1 or 2 doctors, usually older men with a bag of sharp tools and a habit of muttering Latin to sound credible. Formal training was rare. Some studied in London. Others just inherited the job from their fathers, along with a rusty bone saw and a collection of alarming pamphlets. There's a surgeon in town known for setting bones and removing bullets with a speed that's almost impressive. People say he once amputated a man's leg in under 5 minutes while smoking a pipe. That same man later died of infection, but still, fast. Amputation is often the only solution for serious injury. Gangrene spreads fast. One bad wound from a farming accident or an unlucky slip with an axe, and it's either lose the limb or lose your life. Herbalists are more common, and often more helpful. These are mostly women, often midwives, who know how to grind willow bark for pain, how to steep comfrey for wounds, and how to brew pennyroyal tea for a missed cycle. Their knowledge is deep, passed down through generations, often dismissed by the male doctors, even as those same doctors send patients their way when their own treatments fail. They work quietly, carefully, always walking a fine line between healer and suspected witch. And then, looming over all of it is smallpox. It comes in waves, sudden and unforgiving. One infection in the city can spark an outbreak that takes hundreds. It begins with fever, then rash, then the pustules, those awful blistering sores that crust and scar and leave people disfigured for life, if they survive at all. Entire households are quarantined, sometimes entire neighbourhoods. But here's the twist. Boston is one of the first places in the colonies to try inoculation. In 1721, when a particularly vicious outbreak hits, a local minister named Cotton Mather, yes, that Cotton Mather, starts advocating for the practice, which involves infecting people deliberately with a weaker strain to build immunity. It's controversial. People riot over it. But it works. Slowly, painfully, the city learns how to fight back. And that opens the scholarly debate. How willing were colonial Bostonians to embrace science when it's clashed with their worldview? Some resisted anything new, clinging to humoral theory and to superstition. Others, especially during crisis, open their minds to new practices, if not new ideas. The inoculation controversy is often seen as a turning point, where fear battled innovation in the streets of Boston, and neither came out unscathed. Meanwhile, most people still rely on home remedies. Onion poultices, turpentine-soaked cloths, whiskey for pain, boiled bark for fever. You try them all when your brother won't stop coughing, when your mother's leg swells up after a fall, when your child gets too quiet, too still. You pray, you sweat, you wait, and if death comes, it comes fast and unceremoniously. The body is washed, shrouded, and buried quickly, often in a common grave, a wooden marker if you're lucky, a stone if you're wealthy. Mourning is immediate and practical. There's no time to sit with grief when you still have a dozen mouths to feed and no idea who might fall ill next. You walk past the burying ground as the sun starts to dip. It's not hidden away, like a shameful secret. It's right in the heart of the city, because death isn't something you avoid here. It's something you live alongside. The stones are crooked, the engravings harsh, skulls, wings, hourglasses. No sentiment, just reminders. Life is short, illness is always waiting. And your soul better be in order, because your body could give out any minute. You cough again, just a little, probably nothing. But in 1700s Boston, even probably nothing can change everything by morning. You don't mean to eavesdrop, but in Boston, privacy is more of a theory than a practice. The house next to yours is close enough that you can hear every sneeze, cough, and occasional yelling match through the wall. Tonight it's different. The voice isn't raised in anger, it's pain. Someone groans, low and animal, a wet, rattling sound that clutches your gut. You edge closer to your window and catch a glimpse. A man lying flat on a table, his leg bare, twisted at the wrong angle. Two others pin him down, a third pulls a saw from a bag. You look away. In 1700s Boston, medicine walks hand in hand with horror. There's no anesthesia, no sterile tools, no antibiotics. If something's infected, it's got to come off, and it's going to come off with you wide awake and screaming. This is not a place for the squeamish, or the lucky, depending on how you define it. You've probably got a toothache by now. Everyone does. The bread is hard, the beer is acidic, and the concept of oral hygiene is charmingly distant. Maybe you chew cloves, maybe you rinse with salt water, maybe you pray. But sooner or later, the tooth goes bad, swelling your face until you look like you're storing apples in your cheeks. And then you have two options: suffer, or find someone with a pair of iron pliers and very little mercy. There are dentists, sort of. Travelling tooth pullers, barbers who double as surgeons, or even the local blacksmith on a particularly daring afternoon. They'll strap you down, grip the offending molar, and yank until it gives, or you do. There's a cracking sound you won't forget, followed by a rush of blood and maybe some applause if you don't faint. It's like a public sport sometimes. People gather. Wagers are placed. Someone offers you a shot of rum afterward, but your mouth is too full of gauze and regret to say thank you. What makes it worse is that people don't really expect to keep all their teeth past 30. Gaps are common. Rot is constant. Wooden teeth are rare, expensive, and generally terrible. If you've got a full mouth of natural teeth in your 40s, people will assume you've either made a deal with the devil or that you've never smiled once in your life. And as far as personal maintenance goes, it doesn't get much better from there. Ingrown toenail? Live with it. Hernia? Wrap it tight and pretend. Gallstones? Pray they pass, or they'll dig around in you with a knife that last touched a horse. Medical tools are made of iron, wood, and hope. Bone saws, forceps, lancets, none of them sterile. Blood is rinsed off in the nearest bucket, maybe wiped with a shirt sleeve. Instruments aren't boiled, they're blessed. Let's take a walk into the apothecary, shall we? It's a cosy little room packed with jars, each more mysterious than the last. Labels read like spells. Tincture of laudanum, mercurial salve, easy, elixir of vitriol. You ask for something for a persistent fever. The apothecary offers you a powder to mix into your cider, made from antimony, a toxic metal that's supposed to cleanse the system. You politely decline and ask for something gentler. He nods, hands you a small wax packet of dried toadstool and a powdered horn. You take it, because what else are you going to do? Quirky fact, people genuinely believed in the power of animal-based medicine. Powdered deer antler, dried earthworms, even pulverized mummy. Yes, actual mummy, ground up and imported from Egypt, were all used in tonics. The idea was simple. Life essence lingers in dead things, and if you consume it, you'll absorb their strength. In reality, you're just making your insides a lot weirder and your problems a lot worse. And yet some things work. Willow bark for pain, nature's aspirin, honey and garlic for wounds, cold compresses for swelling. Herbalists, especially midwives and older women, know which plants can ease pain and which can send your soul on a permanent vacation. Of course, that knowledge walks a fine line with superstition. Healing herbs in the wrong hands become witchcraft overnight, especially if the patient dies anyway, which they often do. Here's where the scholarly debate slips in. Was early American medicine more harmful than helpful? Some historians argue that traditional remedies did more good than the so-called professionals, who often bled patients until they were too weak to sneeze. Others insist that even misguided treatments were a crucial step toward medical advancement. After all, you have to get it very wrong a few hundred times before you land on something that actually helps. Boston in this century is smack in the middle of that trial and error phase. But no matter the approach, one truth holds steady. Being sick is dangerous. Being injured is worse. A broken bone can mean lifelong disability. An infected cut can end your life in a week. Women especially carry this knowledge in their bones. Childbirth is the most routine and most lethal experience in a woman's life. You know the numbers. 1 in 5 women dies in or after labour. If the baby survives, that's a miracle. If both survive, someone brings bread to your door and calls it divine intervention. You pass a woman leading a child by the hand, her gait slow and uneven. She's limping, but not from a recent injury. Something old. A hip that didn't heal right. maybe a leg broken and never set. She walks like she's used to it. She probably is. Medical help costs money, but suffering is free, so people endure. They live with chronic pain, with bad joints, with mystery illnesses that flare and fade. You hear someone talk about the wasting, a slow sickness that drains the body and leaves only shadow. Consumption, maybe. Tuberculosis. It goes by many names and wears many masks. At night, when the town quiets, the coughing grows louder. It's everywhere, echoing off wood and stone. Some coughs fade with the seasons. Others end with a cart ride to the burying ground. You lie awake and listen, feeling the ache in your side, the tightness in your chest, the way your hands tremble when you try to hold a cup steady. You tell yourself it's nothing, but in Boston Scene Hundreds edition, nothing can become too late in a blink. And still, people wake up the next day, stretch their aching joints and keep moving. Because there's work to do. Always work. And a death? He doesn't make appointments. He shows up when he wants. By late evening, the city exhales. The sun slips behind the rooftops like it's trying to escape before someone asks it to do more work, and the long shadows turn Boston's alleys into ink. Smoke from 100 hearths curls into the sky, tinged with pine and the faint, ever-present scent of boiled turnips. You're done with chores, or at least pretending to be, and you feel it, that rare and fleeting moment when the day loosens its grip. Now comes the question, what does fun look like in 1700s Boston? Don't get excited. There's no movie theatre, no karaoke, no all-you-can-eat buffet. But there is entertainment of a sort, humble, homemade, and often just shy of illegal, depending on who's watching. Because here, in this God-fearing, sermon-saturated, productivity-obsessed town, people still crave distraction. And even the most pious souls can't spend every waking hour reciting psalms and churning butter. Let's start with the humble tavern. Again, Boston's unofficial after-hours club. By now the crowd has thickened. Tankards clink, dice rattle, and someone in the corner is trying to play a fiddle with more confidence than skill. There's laughter, singing, and the occasional argument that's one sentence away from a broken nose. You might hear a sailor slurring through a bawdy ballad, or a merchant boasting about his latest shipment while absolutely mangling the numbers. These are performances, really. The kind people repeat just to feel bigger than their daily lives. And games, so many games. Dice are the favourite. Cheap, portable, and easy to lose your week's wages to. Card games are growing in popularity, though some ministers preach that every shuffle is a sin. If you're caught gambling for money, there's a fine. If you're caught gambling with someone's reputation, there's gossip. Both can ruin you. But people play anyway. Risk is half the fun. You wander down a lane and catch a flash of something. Unusual. A ring of people standing around two roosters, puffed and tense. Cockfighting. Technically illegal. Actually common. The birds don't move at first, just glare and strut. Until a boy pokes one with a stick and feathers explode, the crowd roars. Coins change hands. Someone hisses for silence. A woman with a bonnet too fine for this sort of thing slips away into the night before anyone can recognise her. Good call. Back at home, if you're not into blood sports or losing money to dice, you might reach for your entertainment toolkit. Books, songs and stories. If your household owns a Bible, you might read a chapter aloud. If you're luckier, maybe you've got a book of sermons, almanacs, or poems. Literacy is higher in Boston than in most places, especially for men, so reading aloud becomes its own kind of performance. You stand by the hearth, reciting from memory or making it up when your voice falters, and the rest of the family nods along, pretending they can tell. The difference. Music, it's complicated. Church hymns are safe, songs about shepherds and virtue and the fleeting nature of life, also fine. But anything catchy, rhythmic, or just fun, risky. Some folk songs are passed hand to hand like contraband, hummed under your breath while doing laundry or whittling wood. The line between moral and dangerous music changes weekly depending on who's watching and how loudly you're singing. Dancing, that's a no, at least publicly. Most religious leaders condemn it outright. Too much too much joy. Too much chance for the devil to sneak in through a jig. But that doesn't stop people from tapping their feet or spinning a child around the kitchen to the rhythm of a spoon tapped on a pot. It's not a ball, but it's something, and sometimes something is enough. Here's a quirky little historical note. Boston did have theatre, sort of, though it was a constant battle. Stage plays were often banned for being frivolous, corrupting, or just plain English in a bad way, but people still found ways: puppet shows, travellings, performers, morality plays disguised as educational lectures. A man in a red cloak once stood on a box in the market and reenacted a scene from Julius Caesar, so dramatically that the crowd thought he was having a seizure. He was fined 5 shillings for disturbing the peace. Worth it, probably. There are also spinning bees, gatherings where women bring their spinning wheels and gossip while pretending it's all about productivity. They sit in circles, feet working the treadles, hands twisting fibre, and voices swapping stories, hints, rumours. Who's expecting? Who's drinking too much? Who's courting someone suspiciously well-dressed? These are the social networks before social networks, built in rhythm, cloaked in domesticity. For men, frolics often involve hard cider and mild injury. Wrestling matches in open fields, foot races, target. Practice with the old muskets that probably shouldn't be trusted. These events usually start with good cheer and end with someone's cousin getting stitches. That's tradition. And of course the night is when secrets stretch their legs. Lovers sneak through alleyways, cloaks pulled tight. Teenagers slip out for meetings beneath the moon, avoiding creaky steps and gossipy siblings. Neighbours lean close to share news too sensitive for daylight ears. Did you hear about the Reverend's wife? They say she was seen outside town with him. You pretend not to listen. You fail. There's a scholarly debate about whether colonial Bostonians were truly repressed or simply more skilled at hiding their indulgences. Diaries suggest both. Some people lived by the book, every action measured, every pleasure scrutinised. Others bent the rules until they cracked, just quietly. It wasn't about following the law, it was about not getting caught breaking it. You pass a small gathering, under a lean-to by the docks. A fire crackles in a barrel. Men and women sit close, laughing softly. Someone tells a ghost story, a real one, about a sailor whose ship vanished off Cape Ann and now walks the shoreline at dusk, soaked and silent. Everyone leans in, there's a chill, but no one moves. For a moment, no one remembers the cost of food, the sting of blisters, the ache of endless work. For a moment, it's just story and firelight and something like peace. Back home, your bed calls to you with the some sweet sour smell of worn linen and old wool. Before sleep, you lie in the dark and listen. A fiddle, faint but spirited, a horse clopping down a cobbled road, a laugh that's quickly hushed. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere else a man snores like a dying ox. Life doesn't stop in Boston. It just changes volume. And as your eyes close, you realise that in this city of sermons and soil and relentless expectations, people still find ways to live, to laugh, to break the rules, in small, almost invisible ways. Entertainment here isn't grand. It's survival disguised as joy. Morning creeps back into Boston not with a whisper, but with a thump. The sound of wooden wheels, booted feet, and the occasional shout echoing off damp stone. The city wakes early, and with it comes the news. Not a tidy digest delivered to your doorstep with a cup of hot coffee, but news in the raw, shouted, passed, overheard, and sometimes outright invented. In 1700s Boston, information is an event, and like most events here, it arrives with drama, bias, and at least 3 competing opinions. The town crier is the loudest. You hear him before you see him, trudging up the main road, bell in hand, voice already hoarse. He calls out deaths, lost animals, found items, and the occasional government notice. His voice is flat from repetition, but still carries a certain musicality, like he's reciting lines in a poorly cast play. Be it known to all, he says, that a brown gelding has escaped his tether and answers to the name of Moss. Whether Moss actually answers to anything is up for debate. Printed news exists, sure, but don't picture a full-blown newspaper aisle. You've got the Boston newsletter, a single sheet folded in half, printed once a week on rough yellowing paper that smells faintly of soot and wet hay. It's old by the time it reaches your hands, and it's mostly reprinted reports from London, maritime arrivals, shipping losses, and the occasional local item that manages to slip past the editor's caution. You stop by the print shop to see if the latest issue is in. The printer is covered in ink, fingers blackened, eyes tired. He sets the newly printed pages to dry, careful not to smudge the type. He won't hand one over until the ink is set, but that doesn't stop you from squinting at the wet pages, trying to read backwards through the mirror of damp type. You catch words like fire, petition, and suspicion. It's always those three. Boston doesn't change much. The paper is dull unless you read between the lines. Ship delays aren't just about weather, they're about smuggled goods. A missing apprentice isn't just a runaway, it's a scandal. A fire near the docks might not be accidental, and a visiting gentleman from Virginia often means a loyalist sniffing around where he's not welcome. You learn to read the rhythm of the lies. The truth is there, it's just blurry and hidden under layers of ink and caution. Now, if you're not literate, and many in Boston aren't, you rely on others. The taverns serve as reading rooms. Someone reads aloud while the rest lean in, sipping weak ale and grunting at the bits they understand. You hear the paper read out loud later, the words stumbling from the mouth of a man who's clearly guessing at half the pronunciation. Revolt in Ireland, he says. Someone asks where Ireland is. No one knows. Doesn't matter. Revolt's a revolt. The room agrees it's probably because of taxes. It usually is. Of course, not all news is printed. Most of it spreads mouth to mouth. Gossip is the city's true circulatory system. You pass two women standing by a well, their buckets still swinging while they exchange the day's headlines in whispers. Did you hear about the preacher's cousin, one says? Took sick and passed within 3 days. They say it was unnatural. Unnatural how? Just unnatural. And that's all you get. A breadcrumb, vague and delicious. Sometimes the news is song. Children carry rhymes from neighbourhood to neighbourhood. Fire on Milk Street. No one saved. Not even the baby. Not even the brave. You stop when you hear that one. It's too specific. The street was quiet yesterday. You make a mental note to walk by and see what's left. Other times the news comes from ships, foreign ports, distant wars, tales of plague in Europe, or revolts in the Caribbean. The sailors bring it, half remembered, half fabricated, but always told with authority. The Spanish are stirring again. The French have taken a fort up north. There's gold in the Carolinas. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, but it passes from dock to tavern to parlour, reshaped at each retelling until it becomes real enough. Quirky fact for today, it was common for printers to include letters from readers, written under pseudonyms like a true patriot or a concerned neighbour. Some were real, most were fabricated by the printers themselves to stir public opinion. Early op-eds, essentially, just with more powdered wigs and fewer facts. You read one once that claimed the British Crown was planning to outlaw beef and replace it with salted eel. People panicked. For 2 days you couldn't find beef in the market. Eel sales spiked. The rumour fizzled. People moved on. News is currency, but it's also risk. Too much truth in the wrong place gets you labelled a troublemaker. There are laws, strict ones, against seditious speech. Question the Crown or the colonial leadership too loudly, and you could be fined, imprisoned, or have your paper shut down. Printers learn to walk the line. They include just enough outrage to sell the sheet, but not enough to invite a visit from the governor's men. Which brings us to the scholars' debate. How free was the press in early Boston, really? Some argue that the limitations were heavy, the censorship constant, and the reach minimal. Others believe that despite the threats, these early papers and pamphlets planted the seeds of American dissent. They made people curious, angry, united. You might be reading about a tax on sugar today, but in 5 years you'll be reading about revolution, and maybe writing about it too. You duck into a dry goods shop and hear the merchant talking politics with a customer. It's not the tax, it's the insult, he says, as if we're too stupid to notice. They nod, lower their voices, and glance out the window. You pretend to look at a bolt of cloth, heart beating a little faster. It's starting, that subtle tremor under the surface. You can feel it in the way people speak, the way they don't speak, the way a pause in conversation feels heavier than a full sentence. And all the while, the bell on the church tower chimes the hour. It's a reminder, as always, that time is watching, that news, once whispered, can become action, that words have weight, even if they're printed on paper so cheap it wilts in the fog. You walk back out onto the street, holding your folded sheet in one hand, your thoughts in the other. The news today is mild. A lost cow, a new ship from Barbados, a proposal to fix the West Road. But you know better. Somewhere under those headlines, a match is being struck, And in this city of powder kegs and prim sermons, it only takes a spark. The sound of hammering leads you down to the waterfront, again where the city is constantly under construction, one crooked beam at a time. Boston doesn't grow like a planned city. It grows like a toddler's drawing, ambitious, messy, and with very little regard for symmetry. Streets double back on themselves, houses lean in for gossip, and sheds get built wherever someone has a spare plank and a stubborn will. Still, this chaos has a pulse. It's the sound of work. And right now, most of it is shipbuilding. You duck into the shade of a dry dock where a half-finished schooner rises out of the dirt like a skeleton whale. The men working on it are shirtless and sunburnt, covered in sawdust and grease. They move fast, coordinated without speaking, each step of the process etched into their muscles. One man is sawing a massive oak beam with the kind of rhythm that suggests he'd rather not think too hard. Another is smearing pitch between planks, hands black and sticky. Every inch of the ship is being shaped by hand, and every hand here is rough as rope. Shipbuilding in Boston isn't just a trade, it's a civic identity. The harbour is the city's lungs, and every vessel that leaves or enters it keeps the whole organism breathing. You see merchant ships, fishing boats, privateers and whalers. Each type has its own style, purpose and reputation. A big merchant brig gets respect. A sleeker, faster sloop? That one raises eyebrows. People wonder what's really in its cargo hold. The materials for these vessels come from all over New England. White pine from the north, oak from inland, tar and pitch from pine resin, boiled until it bubbles like something out of a witch's cauldron. Iron nails, rope made from hemp, sails woven in cottages up the coast. Every ship is a collective effort, stitched together from dozens of trades, many of which barely get a thank you. Quirky detail for the day. It's considered bad luck to name a ship before the keel is laid. Some men spit on the ground if they hear a name too early. Others mutter a prayer under their breath. Sailors are deeply superstitious, especially when their lives depend on floating through vast, merciless waters in a glorified wooden bathtub. You wander over to where the sailmakers work, bent over canvas in a shed that smells of wax and sea air. Their fingers move like clockwork, stabbing thick needles through cloth heavy as winter blankets. They sing while they work, low, repetitive shanties that help keep the rhythm. You don't know all the words, but you catch phrases like haul and heave and anchor down. The song isn't for you, it's for the stitches. Near them, the rope walk stretches out, an absurdly long, narrow building where hemp fibres are twisted into thick cables. It looks like someone tried to build a hallway for giants. Men walk backward down the length of it, feeding strands into spinning wheels until the air itself hums with friction. The smell of hemp oil is sharp and earthy. You can feel the texture of it, just by breathing. Everywhere you turn, you're reminded that this city doesn't survive on ideology alone. It survives on labour. The shipwrights, the coopers making barrels, the smiths forging anchor, hooks and nails, the cart drivers hauling supplies from warehouses to wharves. And that's not even counting the stevedores, those human machines who load and unload ships by hand, their backs bowed, their voices hoarse from shouting over gulls. A ship's launch is an event. You're lucky enough to catch one today. The whole neighbourhood gathers by the dock as the final supports are knocked away. There's a creaking groan, a pause thick enough to chew, and then the vessel slides into the water with a splash that soaks everyone in the front row. The ship floats, people cheer. Somewhere a fiddler starts playing. It's the closest thing Boston has to fireworks. Afterward, you follow the ship's path back through the harbour, watching it cut a line across the water like a quill, across parchment. The sea here is everything: resource, threat, escape route. It brings goods and disease, messages and enemies. A ship leaving Boston might carry salted cod to the Caribbean, return with sugar and molasses, and set out again with barrels of rum destined for West Africa. And if that route sounds familiar, it should. It's the triangle trade, the ugly engine behind a lot of Boston's prosperity. There's debate, of course, about how deeply involved Boston was in the slave trade. Some argue the city's merchants preferred to profit indirectly, trading goods rather than people. Others point to ship manifests, letters, and sugar profits that suggest plenty of Bostonians knew exactly where their rum came from and what it cost. The ships were built here, the barrels were made here, the money stayed here. Complicity, like tar, sticks even when you try to wipe it off. Still, you can't deny the craftsmanship. You pass a dock where an old sea captain brags about his last voyage to anyone who'll listen. 12 knots in a gale, he says, pounding the table. She danced over the waves like a fox on fire. His ship sits behind him, sleek, sharp, and entirely too expensive for anyone at this table to ever own. But they admire her anyway, the way men admire something powerful and unattainable. A good ship isn't just wood and sail, it's pride. Boston's reputation as a shipbuilding powerhouse is growing. Already ships built here are respected across the Atlantic. Some are faster, some are tougher, some are built to outrun pirates, which is saying something because pirates do not mess around. You hear about a schooner fitted with hidden compartments perfect for smuggling, or hiding weapons, or both. You pretend not to care, but you definitely want to see inside. It's not just the ships themselves, it's what they symbolize. Freedom, wealth, escape. A young man polishing a capstan looks out toward the harbour and says, "Next year, I'm signing on, I want to see London," his friend scoffs. "You'll see Barbados and a whipping post." Neither of them is wrong, and so the city pulses, driven by tides, ambition, and an ever-present awareness that everything here is both temporary and anchored by the sea. Ships come and go, people vanish onto them and never right back. Others return changed, eyes squinting like they're still looking for the horizon. As the sun dips low again and the hammering slows, you realise how many lives hinge on these vessels, how many hands touch each board, how many futures ride on each voyage. Boston may be a town of sermons and stocks, but it's also a place built on ships, rising from the harbour like the city's own heartbeat, always moving, always braving the wind. The alarm bell rings once, clear and distant, then again, louder. Then again, fast, frantic, like it's trying to shake the whole city awake. You freeze, the hair on your arms rising. Everyone around you does the same. Because in 1700s Boston, when that bell rings like that, it can only mean one thing: fire. You're moving before you realise it. It's like everyone else, feet pounding the packed dirt streets, turning corners sharp enough to skin your knuckles. Smoke is already curling over the rooftops, black and oily, licking at the sky with hungry fingers. Someone screams, "Dock square!" and everyone changes direction. You follow the current of bodies, hands ready, heart thumping, and not entirely sure what you're supposed to do, except run toward the smoke. It's a wooden city, that's the problem. The houses, the roofs, the shops, the stables, timber, all of it, sugirti, dry and cracked, and begging for a spark. Chimneys are crooked, hearths are overfed, candles get left burning, and a single careless moment can light up half a block. Fire isn't an accident, it's a predator. And in a city like Boston, it always finds something to chew on. You reach the square just as the crowd thickens. The building's already gone. Engulfed in flame, the roof collapsed inward like a broken promise. The heat hits your face hard. It smells like pine pitch and scorched wool, and beneath that something worse. You don't want to know what it is. A man staggers past, his beard smoking. A woman drags a child by the arm, both crying. And everywhere, the sound of buckets. Buckets being filled, passed, sloshed, emptied. It's a human chain, messy, desperate, and the only defence you've got. There are no fire engines, no hydrants, no trained firefighters in heavy gear. There are bucket brigades, volunteer watchmen, and pure adrenaline. People form lines from wells and pumps to the blaze, passing water in leather buckets from hand to hand. Some run for ladders, others tear down adjacent structures, hoping to create a firebreak before the wind turns traitor. The air pulses with heat. Embers dance like angry fireflies. You jump into the line. The bucket is heavier than you expect, slippery, stinking. You pass it on, take another again, your arms burn. You can't see your feet. Someone behind you shouts to, "Move faster, for God's sake!" A man on the rooftop tries to smother the blaze with a blanket, which bursts into flames before it even makes contact. You start to wonder if it's working, or if you're all just delaying the inevitable. Quirky fact, Boston had a fire ward system in place, and wardens wore small staffs painted red and white. If you saw a man running toward you with one of those shouting orders, you were supposed to obey without hesitation. Fire didn't respect status, wealth, or titles. So when that fire warden shouts at a merchant to knock down his own shed, he He does it, tears streaming from smoke, swinging an axe into his livelihood without blinking. And there's another fun detail. Every house is supposed to keep 2 leather buckets and a ladder by law. If you don't and fire reaches your place, good luck finding help. People remember. You were warned. Still, with all that, buildings burn. You hear the crash as a beam falls. Sparks shoot skyward. A man shouts something about barrels of whale oil in the back room, then runs. You hope he's wrong. The flames stretch higher, dancing like they're celebrating. The building next door catches just as you feared. There's a moment where the entire crowd groans in unison, like a collective prayer turning into a curse. You don't notice the blisters on your hands until the bucket slips. Someone else scoops it up. You get another. You keep going. That's how it is. No heroics, just hands and water and hope. By nightfall, the fire is out, but not gone. The square is blackened, the air thick and chemical. Steam hisses from the smouldering wood, and the ground is slippery with ash and sweat. People mill around, silent and dazed. Some try to salvage things. A scorched chair here, a melted spoon. One man is holding a singed Bible like it's a child he has, pulled from the wreckage. Another just sits, arms on his knees, watching what used to be his shop turn into cooling rubble. Here comes the debate, whispered among the soot. How did it start? A knocked-over lamp? A chimney not cleaned in time? Arson? Insurance fraud? The last one's not uncommon. More than one struggling business has mysteriously gone up in flames. If you're caught, it's jail. If not, it's a restart. A terrible, slightly suspicious miracle. And let's not forget, the fire watch is supposed to prevent this. They walk the streets at night, bells in hand, looking for smoke, sniffing for trouble. If they missed it, someone's going to answer for that. Tomorrow the town meeting will be loud, accusations will fly. But tonight, there's just smoke and conduits. Scholars still debate how effective Boston's early firefighting systems were. The bucket brigades, the fire wardens, the laws about ladders and shingles. Did it work, or was it just damage control? Evidence suggests both. Some fires were contained with stunning speed, others wiped out entire neighbourhoods. The Great Fire of 1760, just a few decades from where you're standing, will destroy 1 buildings. Maybe this one's a warm-up. You walk home through quiet streets where the air still crackles. People lean from their windows asking what was lost. The Cooper's place, so you say, gone. They nod like it's a weather report. Boston burns often enough that people don't even flinch. Back in your room, you peel off your scorched outer layer and hold your hands up to the light. Blistered, blackened, shaking. You soak them in cold water and try not to think about the screams, or the smell, or the way you saw someone digging in the ashes for something. A ring, maybe, a tooth, and yet, tomorrow they'll start rebuilding. That's the strange, relentless rhythm of this place. Boston doesn't stop. It scorches, it smoulders, it rebuilds. The soot fades, the stories don't. Morning, and again you're counting coins, except you're not really counting, you're weighing, rubbing, judging. Because in 1700s Boston, money isn't as simple as pulling out a few crisp bills or tapping a card. You've got a mix of coins from different countries, chipped and worn, some more trusted than others. Spanish relays, Dutch guilders, even the occasional Portuguese coin slipped in with a prayer no one notices. British pounds, shillings and pence dominate in theory, but good luck making change when nobody agrees on their exact worth. The truth is, Boston's economy runs on a weird blend of coin, barter, credit and IOUs that might never be settled. You hand a merchant a silver piece and he holds it up to the light, bites it, checks its weight. Feels light, he mutters. Of course it does, they always say that. Then he nods, sighs and finally hands over your half-pound of sugar. Imported, expensive, and probably taxed 3 different ways by now. For most people, coin is rare and precious. You don't carry it unless you have to. Most transactions happen through credit, but not the friendly modern kind that involves a magnetic strip and late fees. This is personal, face-to-face, handwritten in a notebook credit. Put it on my tab, you say. I'll pay you after the next shipment comes in. Or after the harvest. Or when my cousin settles the estate. Or, let's be honest, never. Everyone owes someone. Everyone's keeping score, and everyone pretends they're a lot closer to even than they are. Step into a shop and you're in the middle of a carefully choreographed dance. You ask for soap. The shopkeeper says it's gone up in price, something about ship delays and spoiled lye. You haggle, not just to save a few pence, but because haggling's expected. A good customer argues. A smarter customer trades. Barter is alive and well. You need a pound of nails, offer a few chickens, want a pair of shoes. Maybe your wife can mend the cobbler's son's a coat. Services for goods, goods for promises, promises for favours. It's all negotiable, and nobody's entirely sure if they're getting the better end of the deal. But as long as both parties walk away only slightly resentful, it counts as fair. Quirky fact: one of the most common trade currencies in Boston is rum. Distilled in local stills using Caribbean molasses, rum becomes a stand-in for coin, especially in taverns and among sailors. You can pay for services, settle debts, even buy lieu. Buy land if the rum is strong and the terms are loose. There's something oddly poetic about an economy partly built on sugar, slaves and alcohol, like the whole system is just one bad hangover waiting to happen. Meanwhile, behind all this hustle, the big players are stacking their ledgers. Merchants, importers and landowners deal in bills of exchange, written promises that act like money, provided you trust the signature at the bottom. These are the people who can go weeks without touching a single coin. They trade paper and names and favours like a secret language. You watch two of them nod over a table in the back of a tavern, ink drying on a document that might be worth a fortune, or might be completely worthless if the ship sinks or the buyer dies. Debt is everywhere, quiet, sticky, omnipresent. You owe the baker. The baker owes the flour merchant. The merchant owes the ship captain. The captain owes the dock worker. The dock worker owes the tailor. And somehow this web holds together, just barely. But there's a darker edge to it too. If you can't pay, really can't pay, you risk debtor's prison. It's not a myth. The city has a place for people who fail to meet their obligations. You pass it sometimes. A squat grey building that smells like mildew and disappointment. Not everyone comes out. Debtors can rot there for years, writing letters no one answers, waiting for relatives to scrape together enough to buy them out. And if you're poor and friendless, well, you were warned. There's another side to Boston's money story that people don't like to mention too loudly. Counterfeiting. It's a problem, a big one. Coins get clipped, shaved, or even forged entirely. Paper money is even worse. Massachusetts has experimented with its own colonial currency, bills of credit, but they fluctuate wildly in value and are often refused outright. You watch a man try to pay for a sack of flour with a local note, only to be laughed out of the shop. Come back when you've got real money, the shopkeeper sneers. That introduces the scholarly debate. Was colonial paper currency a necessary innovation, or a financial disaster in slow motion? Some historians say it allowed local economies to grow in the absence of British coin. Others argue it laid the groundwork for inflation, corruption, and chaos. The truth, as always, probably lives somewhere in the middle, wearing a slightly singed waistcoat and mutterings about exchange rates. You stop at the market and overhear an argument about wheat prices. It's the French, one man says. They're buying it all up in Quebec. No, says another. It's the drought inland. No, insists a third. It's the governor's new tariff. You smile. It's always someone's fault. And nobody ever agrees whose. The price still goes up. Children sell small goods on corners. Berries, pins, lengths of string. They hold out their hands for coin but take buttons, bone beads, or promises scrawled on dirty parchment. One girl offers a poem in exchange for bread. You don't understand half the words, but it's good enough to earn her a heel of yesterday's loaf. Art for food, not the worst trade. At home you check your own small stash. A few worn coins, an IOU from your cousin that you know will never be repaid, and a scrap of parchment from a merchant promising 2 barrels of cider by next month. That cider might turn before it arrives. The cousin definitely will. Still, you tuck it all away. It's wealth, sort of. Or Boston's economy may be confusing, messy and unsteady, but it functions. It breathes. It adapts. And somehow, in all this tangle of credit, barter and barely legal rum deals, people get by. Barely, but just enough. And in the candlelight, while you scribble notes about who owes what and what favours you're planning to call in next week, you realise something simple and terrifying. The entire system depends on memory, trust and fear. There's no bank to back you up, no credit bureau to dispute the record, just you, your word, and your ability to nod confidently while owing 5 people and paying none. You'll make it work. You always do, just Don't lose that coin pouch. It might be the only real thing you've got. You wake up sticky. Not warm, sticky. Your hair's matted to the back of your neck, the sheets are damp with sleep, and the little thatched window above your bed leaks a beam of sun that hits you right between the eyes like a musket ball. Welcome to hygiene in 1700s Boston, where clean is more of a vibe than a measurable state. First things first, don't look for a bathroom. There isn't one. You've got a chamber pot tucked under the bed, and if you're lucky, someone remembered to empty it last night. If not, well, don't tip it over. The necessary is usually a shared outhouse out back, which in the summer smells like something that died while holding a grudge. If it's the middle of winter, you just try to hold it, or you go behind a shed, or in a bucket. Boston's full of secrets, and many of them are very pungent. Bathing, in the way you're thinking of it, doesn't happen. Not daily, not even weekly. Full-body baths are reserved for special occasions, births, deaths. Maybe your wedding if someone insists. Most people stick to the partial washings, splashing water on their face, hands, and whatever else might be visibly offending. Others, you stand at a basin, dip a rag and scrub quickly, wincing at the chill. Soap is expensive and it smells weirdly like ashes and animal fat. Because that's what it's made of. The idea of bathing every day, especially in hot water, is considered suspiciously luxurious, possibly even dangerous. Too much water, people say, opens the pores and invites disease. Bathing is for invalids, the French, or those with entirely too much time on their hands. You're not one of them. But what you do take seriously is linen. Clean undergarments, especially the shift or shirt worn closest to the skin, are swapped out often and washed as best you can. The logic goes like this. There's linen and absorbs the filth and sweat, and by changing it, you're keeping yourself clean. It's flawed, but it's also the best you've got. There's a laundry line behind the house where wet clothes hang stiff and grey, snapping in the wind. The washwoman, if you're well off enough to hire one, boils your linens in lye soap, beats them with paddles and spreads them out to dry with the look of someone personally offended by every stain. You don't ask what she thinks of your underthings. You already know. Your teeth. You scrape them with a rag, maybe rub them with chalk or salt. Toothbrushes exist, sort of, but they're rare and look like something you'd use to clean a pistol. Toothpaste is even rarer. Mouthwash is alcohol. Bad breath is common. Rotting teeth are accepted as part of the aging process, and by 35 you're already calculating which molars are a lost cause. And your hair. Oh, your hair. You comb it daily vigorously to remove lice and dirt. Head lice are a normal shared reality. You check yourself for nits, like you're examining smuggled goods. Some people shave their heads and wear wigs instead, but only if they've got the money and patience to powder and preen every morning. Wigs are itchy, hot, and heavy. A commitment. You stick with your own hair, tying it back with a scrap of ribbon that used to be white. Perfume? If you're wealthy, sure. A dab of lavender water behind the ears, a splash of rose oil on a kerchief. If you're not, your scent is, well, you. And you is a mix of smoke, sweat, soap, if used recently, and wool. It's not exactly offensive, just human. Everyone smells, everyone knows. Nobody really talks about it. Quirky detail of the day. Many Boston homes keep an orange or clove-studded pomander hanging near the door or tucked into a pocket to ward off bad air. Not for decoration, defense. It's believed that disease travels through smells, what they call miasma. If it stinks, it's sick. So people try to mask foul odours with herbs, spices, vinegar-soaked rags, or the occasional whiff of snuff. There's a scholarly debate about just how dirty people actually were in early Boston. Some claim the colonists were oblivious to filth, sloshing around in their own grime like happy pigs. Others argue that they did the best they could with what they had. Cold water, lye soap, and an understanding of cleanliness rooted more in visual respectability than actual sterilisation. Either way, the past doesn't smell like parchment and candlelight. It smells like people, and people are messy. Let's take a walk down the street. You pass a woman tossing dirty water out her front door, pausing just long enough to shout "heads" before it splashes into the gutter. She's emptied her wash tub, or possibly her chamber pot. You don't ask. Boston streets double as the city's plumbing. Waste runs down the centre in open channels, A thin soup of rainwater, horse dung, and every unpleasant fluid imaginable. You step carefully. Rats? Yes. Flies? Absolutely. The flies, especially in summer, are like a biblical plague with wings. You swat them away from your food, your face, your baby. You lose that fight every time, but still you try. It's instinct. Bathhouses exist, but they're rare and frowned upon. Too much like taverns, too close to the idea of brothels. If you're seen going to one, expect whispers. In fact, expect whispers no matter what you do. Cleanliness might be next to godliness in theory, but in practice, people are more suspicious of those who seem too clean. What are they hiding? Children are cleaned less often than adults. They're constantly smudged with dirt, soot, ink, or food. A little grime is considered part of growing up. They're wiped down when they start to smell, and not a moment before. You pass a small boy with jam on his face, dried blood on his knee, and what you hope is mud on his shirt. He grins at you, teeth missing, hair wild, classic Boston youth. You get used to the feel of your own skin in this world. Dry, tight, layered in invisible dust. Your fingernails are always rimmed with something. Your elbows always slightly rough. It becomes normal, you adapt. You learn which streams are clean enough to dip a cloth in, which herbs mask odour best, which parts of the body itch at first when you've gone too long without a wash. It's survival, but also routine. So tonight, when you finally sit down by candlelight, you dip your rag in tepid water and wipe your face. You scrub behind your ears. You rinse your feet, massage your scalp, shake out your shift. It's not a bath, but it helps. A little. And when you crawl into bed, you wrap yourself in the same wool blanket you've been using for weeks, breathing in your own scent like a familiar story. Not sweet, not sour, just you. And in 1700s Boston, that's the best kind of clean there is. You wake to the soft tolling of the church bell, not for a fire this time, not for alarm, but for worship. It's Sunday in Boston, which means everything grinds to a halt except for piety. Streets that normally echo with carts and shouting vendors now fall into an expectant hush. The air feels cleaner. The city's somehow more symmetrical, as if it knows better than to misbehave while God's watching. You don't get a choice in this. Church attendance isn't just expected, it's essentially mandated by law. A deeply religious town like Boston doesn't really do casual faith. There's no such thing as spiritual but not religious. You're in or you're out. And if you're out, you'd better be quiet about it. You drag yourself out of bed, put on your cleanest shirt, and prepare to spend the next few hours in stiff silence and social scrutiny. The walk to church is orderly. Families in their Sunday best, darker clothes, cleaner faces, smoother hair, file down the cobbled streets with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals. In some ways, that's what this is. A temporary death of individuality. No laughing, no dawdling, eyes forward, shoes polished. Even the dogs seem better behaved. You arrive at the meeting house, Boston's not quite cathedral, built of weathered wood and crowned with a modest steeple. There are no stained glass windows, no incense, no statues. This is Puritan architecture, plain, stern, and functional. Inside, it's colder than outside. The wooden benches are hard and unforgiving, designed less for comfort, more to remind you that salvation should never be easy. You find your spot in the pew, you have a spot. Pew seating is often assigned, with wealthier families getting the best places, up front near the pulpit. You, however, toward the middle rear, behind a particularly wide man who smells like smoked herring. It's fine. You weren't planning to see much anyway. The service begins without fanfare. There's no organ, no choir, just a long, droning hymn sung by the entire congregation in loose, often tuneless harmony. Some people sing well, most don't. You mouth the words and try to keep the rhythm. The lines are slow, meant to stretch. Hymns can take 15 minutes if the deacon decides to lead by example. You can practically hear the paint drying. Then comes the sermon, and oh, the sermon. 2 hours if you're lucky. 3 if the preacher is feeling inspired or angry, which he usually is. He climbs into the elevated pulpit like a man about to announce the apocalypse. And maybe he is. His voice echoes through the space, a stern blend of scripture, local gossip cloaked as examples, and repeated warnings about the eternal flames that await liars, drunkards, gamblers, and, he says with one raised eyebrow, those who break the Sabbath. You glance around. A few people are already nodding off. An old man leans dangerously sideways, on the edge of falling into his neighbour's lap. Children are twitching in their seats, eyes glazed over. A mother pinches her son's arm hard. He stifles a yelp. Someone coughs. The preacher glares. Religion isn't just belief here. It's law, culture and law, and performance. And Sundays are the steer. You sit upright, as much out of fear as devotion, and try not to think about your aching back or how hungry you already are. You should have eaten more breakfast, but Sabbath rules forbid unnecessary labour, and that includes cooking. Whatever was left over from Saturday is what you've got. Cold bread, maybe some dried apples. Enjoy. Quirky fact, in Boston, Sabbath violators can actually be fined. If you're caught doing laundry, sweeping, or heaven forbid travelling too far on foot, someone might report you. Yes, people snitch. It's seen as an act of righteousness. Brother Matthews was seen buying tobacco on the Lord's Day, someone will whisper. That's enough to earn a fine or worse. Public shaming, stocks even. Imagine standing with your head and hands locked in a wooden frame while everyone walks past muttering about your wickedness. You'd think twice before heating up a stew. Back in church, the sermon turns to Judgment Day. There's talk of locusts, gnashing of teeth, eternal torment. The preacher's face flushes with intensity, sweat trickling down his temple. He slams the pulpit for emphasis. A baby starts crying. He doesn't pause. Then, like a cloud lifting, he shifts into hope. Redemption. Grace. But only if you walk the narrow path. No dancing, no vanity, no secret meetings in the dark with your neighbour's daughter. You know who you are. Finally, mercifully it ends. People file out slowly, as if emerging from a trance. Some are teary-eyed. Others blink like they've just resurfaced from a long dive. You shake out your legs, which feel like wood themselves now, and stretch in the sunlight. The meeting house looms behind you, a rectangular reminder of your soul's precarious position. But church doesn't end with the service. The real business begins after. This is when the socialising starts. The subtle assessment of who was there, who wasn't, who sang off key, who arrived late, who left early. You exchange greetings on the green, bow slightly to your betters, nod to your equals, and pretend not to notice your rivals, deacons. Wife smiles at you with the kind of smile that says, I know something. You return it with one that says, try me. Children finally get to move. They chase each other between gravestones, dirt streaking their stockings, while parents shout half-heartedly to behave. Some folks linger, pulling each other aside to discuss marriage prospects, upcoming land disputes, or the troubling rumour that the governor's planning a new tax. The Sabbath is sacred, but networking is eternal. You head home, keeping your pace slow. Walking too fast might be construed as rushing, and rushing is unseemly. The street is lined with others doing the same thing, like a parade of pious ducks, all waddling in their best shoes and stiffest collars. There's no Sunday lunch waiting for you, just the same bread and cheese from this morning, maybe a cold slice of yesterday's meat pie if you're lucky. You sit by the hearth, tear off a chunk of bread, and feel your jaw doing most of the work. Outside, the town continues its slow spin under the eye of the Sabbath. No hammering, no carts, just quiet. And this is what Sunday is. Quiet, stiff, mildly uncomfortable, and absolutely required. Required. It's both holy and hollow, depending on where your heart sits. You wonder how many others are thinking the same thing, silently counting the hours until Monday, when you can finally chop wood and shout again. Still, as the sun begins to dip and the shadows stretch across the common, you admit there's something peaceful about it all. The stillness, the order, the knowledge that everyone is equally bored and equally judged. In a world so chaotic and cruel, maybe one day a week of enforced restraint isn't the worst idea. As long as the preacher doesn't talk about hell again next week, you're still recovering. If Monday has a spell, it is a damp wool and fresh manure. The Sabbath hush is gone, replaced by the full-throated grind of a city getting back to business. You wake up to the sound of someone shouting about fish, and it's not even sunrise yet. You don't need to look out the window to know that the docks are already roaring, carts are rolling, and your neighbour's rooster is having an existential crisis. Welcome back to Workweek Boston, sore, smoky, and not remotely interested in your complaints. You swing your legs over the bed, stretch, and remember instantly that your shoulders are still sore from the bucket brigade. Doesn't matter. You've got a full day ahead. Maybe it's weaving, maybe it's butchering, Maybe it's cleaning out the chamber pot of a judge who insists on eating pickled onions with every meal. Work here isn't glamorous, and it never ends. You eat what you can. Cold porridge, usually. Maybe a crust of bread that feels one notch softer than brick. Coffee is a luxury. Tea is British. So unless you're fancy or politically conflicted, you stick with cider or hot water flavoured with anything you can boil without dying. Then it's out the door and into the street, dodging horses, pigs, children, and someone who definitely should have dumped that slop somewhere else. The town is alive again, alive in the way that only a tightly packed, unpaved, smoke-filled grid of labourers can be. You pass shopkeepers lifting shutters, apprentices sweeping thresholds, and a line already forming outside the blacksmiths. Someone's horse threw a shoe, someone else is hoping to have a cracked hinge repaired before winter. Good luck with that. Today you're doing deliveries. Not glamorous, but it pays in coin, or at least in promises. You pick up a parcel wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. Inside, a bolt of coarse fabric, 6 dried cod, and what might be the stiffest woolen socks on earth. They go to the north end. No directions necessary. You've done this before. You know Boston by feel now, by texture. Your feet can read the cobblestones better than most people can read the Bible. Work in Boston is everything. Not just survival, but identity. You're not that man with the limp or that woman with the lazy eye. You're the Cooper's boy or the weaver from Purchase Street. Your job is your name. And if you don't have one, if you're jobless, idle, visibly poor, you get a new name, burden. The community keeps track. Neighbours notice. And eventually someone from the selectman's office comes around to ask pointed questions. There are poor houses, but you don't want to end up in one. They're overcrowded, cold and reek of despair. If you're lucky, you get a blanket and some mouldy bread. If you're not, you get lice and a sermon. So you keep working, keep walking, keep nodding to people who might offer you more jobs later. Hustle isn't modern, it's ancient. It's baked into the stones here. Mid-morning, you stop by the printer's shop to drop off a bundle of rags. Paper doesn't grow on trees, not in this century. It's made from linen rags, pulped and pressed and dried until it can hold ink. Everyone saves scraps. You get a penny a pound, maybe. It's slow money, but it adds up. Inside, the printer is red-eyed and ink-smudged, bent over a fresh layout. He waves you off mid-sentence. Deadlines don't exist here, but timing still matters. There's news to print, political letters, ship schedules, possibly a badly rhymed poem about last week's fire. You wait, shift your weight, and eventually get your payment. 4 coins and a look that says be grateful. Lunch is whatever fits in your pocket. A slice of cheese wrapped in cloth, a small hand pie that's more crust than filling. You eat standing, leaning against the side of a building while the market buzzes around you. You watch a butcher's apprentice trying to chase a runaway chicken. He loses. Twice. The crowd cheers anyway. And then it's on to the next task. A delivery for a midwife. Not something most people want to carry. Her satchel smells like a mix of herbs, lye, and something suspiciously meaty. But she's important. She's seen things, she pays promptly. You find her kneeling in front of a small cottage, talking to a nervous-looking young woman whose belly suggests it's going to be a long night. Work here comes in layers. There's the visible labour, carrying, chopping, hammering, and then there's the invisible, spanning, scraping, mending, scrubbing. Women's work, it's called, though that phrase is both limiting and laughable. You've seen women out in the field hefting buckets, guiding oxen, lifting bales that would make grown men weep, and men sometimes sweeping porches with a quiet desperation that says, "My wife is watching." Quirky fact for today, if you're a chimney sweep, you're almost certainly a child. Small bodies fit better. You climb inside soot-choked flues with a brush, a rope, and little protection. You cough black for days, you die young. But it's a job, and if you're a good climber, you see, might live long enough to become an apprentice in something else, like coffin making. You pass a woman at her spinning wheel, foot tapping like a heartbeat. The rhythm is soothing, the thread growing longer. She's making wool for the winter, part of the never-ending race between weather and preparation. Every family is storing up now salted meat, dried fruit, candles, wool, firewood. Everyone feels it in their bones. Winter doesn't knock, it barrels in. A scholarly debate still simmers about how much mobility people had in this kind of economy. Could a hard-working labourer rise into the wealth? Were the lines between class permeable? Some say yes, through smart marriage, land speculation, or sheer luck. Others argue the system was too rigid, too tangled in old-world hierarchy to let anyone climb without scandal. You know a man who used to be a fisherman and now owns 2 boats. You also know a merchant's son who lost everything in a single bet. Maybe the truth is that you can rise, but only if you don't fall first. By late afternoon you're exhausted. Your shirt is damp, your boots are dusted with the city's filth, and your arms ache from carrying bundles that feel heavier every hour. You pause by the pump for a drink, cold water that tastes faintly of iron and moss. You let it dribble down your throat, splash some on your face, and try to remember what's left on your list. One last stop, a letter to deliver. You knock on the door, hand over the folded note, and say nothing, when the woman who receives it goes pale. Bad news travels fast, but it still stings when it arrives. Evening pulls down like a curtain. The sky turns that familiar mix of smoke and violet, and the torches come out. Small flames flickering outside shops and doorways, warning the night that people are still watching. You trudge home, bones tired, stomach growling, mind already dreading tomorrow's list. There is no weekend, no break, just a cycle of tasks that stretch forward until something, injury, illness, age, finally stops you. You open your door, kick off your boots, and collapse onto the stool. You earned enough today to cover 2 meals and a favour. That's a win. You don't smile, but you don't frown either. You're too tired for either. And in this moment, sweaty, sore, half-fed, and humming with the dull ache of effort, you feel strangely alive, not happy, not safe, but present, which in 1700s Boston is no small feat. You're woken before dawn by shouting, again, but this time it's not a fire, not the fishmonger, not even a drunken sailor singing hymns in the wrong key. This time it's something else entirely. The clang of hooves, the metallic rattle of weapons, and a crowd starting to form near the centre of town. You blink yourself upright, heart already thudding. Because in Boston, unrest doesn't wait for daylight. And lately there's been unrest. The streets are restless, and so are you. You pull on your clothes, still damp from yesterday's sweat, and slip outside. The crowd isn't huge yet, but it's growing. People cluster around the notice board, where someone has posted a broadside in thick dark letters. You don't get close enough to read it, but the gist spreads fast. The Crown has imposed a new tax, again, this time on something vital. Could be tea, could be glass, could be paper. The details don't even matter anymore. It's the principle, or at least that's what everyone says. You hear the names whispered. Otis, Adams, Hancock. Names that used to just be neighbours, merchants or writers, but now carry a kind of gravitational pull. They're not calling for rebellion, not quite, but the lines between petition and protest have thinned dangerously. The taverns are buzzing, the sermons are sharper, and people are beginning to look over their shoulders before speaking, even in their own homes. Someone tosses a stone, not at anyone, just into the square, but it's enough. The tension spikes. A soldier steps forward. You catch a glimpse of red. The coat, the musket, the look that says, "Go ahead, make my job harder." You pull back into the edge of the crowd, half curious, half cautious. Boston's a British town, technically, but that technically has started to fray. The soldiers posted here, meant to maintain order, are beginning to feel more like a threat than a shield. They patrol in pairs, they watch everything, and they're not above cracking a skull if it proves a point. You remember what happened on King Street not long ago. 5 colonists dead, snowballs and musket fire. Well, they call it a massacre now. The word tastes different depending on who says it. Still, life grinds on. That's the bizarre part. You can have political turmoil and a laundry list of injustices, and still you've got to sweep your stoop, feed your goats, and mend your coat before the cold gets in. The revolution is brewing, but so is the stew. You make your way toward the Green Dragon Tavern. Carefully, this place has become the unofficial headquarters for discontent. Patriots, radicals, troublemakers, depending on your perspective. The front room is noisy, thick with smoke and murmured plans. The back room? That's for the inner circle. You're not in it. Yet. But you hear things, that meetings are held here, that papers are signed, that maybe, just maybe, something big is coming. You pass a man scratching on a parchment with a quill so worn it's basically a featherless stick. He's drafting a broadside, something to rouse the people. The language is angry but elegant. You admire that, fury in a corset of grammar. Quirky fact, Boston has more printers per capita than almost any other colonial city. Information is a weapon, and the printing press is the forge. Satirical essays, political tracts, anonymous letters. This town produces them like rats in a bakery. You see one nailed to a post. No taxation without representation. You don't even blink anymore. The phrase is everywhere, carved into the very wood of the city. There's a woman selling ribbons in the square. Red for the crown, blue for the colonists. You wonder how she decides which to wear herself. Maybe she changes it daily. Smart. By afternoon things have calmed for now. But there's a pulse under everything, a thrum, the sense that Boston is a pot left on the flame just a little too long. People are choosing sides, even if they don't say it out loud. You pass a merchant who once swore loyalty to the king. Now he's selling American-made goods, loudly. You nod. He doesn't nod back. The scholars will debate forever when the revolution actually began. Was it a tax, a massacre, a midnight ride that hasn't happened yet? Some say it was all of those. Some say it was the moment people started thinking of themselves as something other than British. You don't have a parchment declaration in your pocket. You don't speak in slogans. But still you feel it. The shift, the edge. You return home to find a new scratch on your door. 3 small marks. You don't know who made them. Some say it's a symbol used by the Sons of Liberty. A warning. Or a promise. Or maybe just someone being careless with a nail. But you watch the street a little more carefully that night. You sit by your small fire, stirring a pot of beans that refuse to soften. Outside you hear a cart roll by. A soldier's boots on cobblestone. A child crying out for someone who doesn't answer. And above it all, the wind. The Boston wind, forever nosy. Slipping through shutters, whispering through keyholes, tugging at cloaks like it wants to be part of the conversation. You think about the future. About what might happen if the town truly breaks. If the protests become battles. If the neighbours you smiled at yesterday are the enemies tomorrow. There's no way to know. But you do know one thing. Boston is changing. And you're standing right in the sea. Middle of it. Tomorrow someone might hand you a musket, or a pamphlet, or a bayonet, or a pen. You'll take it. You're not ready. But no one ever is. So here you are, 30 sections later, hair a little tangled from your nightcap, eyes dry from staring at candlelight too long, and probably wondering what time it is in your own corner of the world. Boston in the 1700s has left you dusty, wind-chapped, overworked, half-fed, half-informed, and very much in need of a foot-soak and a nap. You've walked its alleys, smelled its docks, survived its fires, and learned how to live without toilet paper or sarcasm on demand. Barely. But here's the thing, every dull chore, every quiet act of rebellion, every clanging bucket and whispered tavern meeting, they all stitch the backdrop of something bigger. Something people would later call revolution, liberty, and democracy. Though at the time it probably felt more like stress, back pain and unpaid debts. Boston didn't flip a switch and become important overnight. It simmered, it laboured, it seethed, and in the middle of that slow boil were people just like you. Tired, petty, hopeful, and so much braver than they probably meant to be. You didn't meet all the famous names. You weren't at the signing of anything. But that's the truth of daily life in 1700s Boston. It was lived by thousands of hands doing ordinary things under extraordinary pressure. And maybe that's what makes it so worth remembering. So now, as you kick off your metaphorical boots and stretch under your blanket, maybe with a fan humming in the background and the glow of your phone screen fading, take a moment to let it all settle. The grime, the grit, the grind, and that quiet, itchy sense that you were just on the edge of something huge. You made it to the end. Boston didn't kill you. The outhouses almost did. Sleep well. You've earned it.